Hello everyone, I'm the Dream Teller and I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. The moment I stepped into the Thompsons' mansion, I knew something was off. It wasn't the grandeur of the place or the eerie silence that permeated the air. No. It was the way Mrs. Thompson's eyes darted nervously as she showed me to the security room. "It's just a precaution," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Check the cameras every hour or so. It's probably nothing, but..." She trailed off, leaving the sentence hanging in the air like a guillotine. I nodded, trying to hide my unease. It was just another babysitting gig, right? Easy money for a college student like me. But as the Thompsons left for their charity gala, the weight of the empty house settled on my shoulders. Little Oliver was already asleep upstairs, his gentle snores echoing through the baby monitor. I settled into the plush sofa in the living room, the security tablet resting on the coffee table like a ticking time bomb. The first hour passed uneventfully. I flipped through the channels, only half watching some reality TV show. When the clock struck 9, I reluctantly picked up the tablet. The security system was state-of-the-art, with cameras covering every angle of the sprawling estate. I swiped through the feeds, the manicured front lawn, the Olympic-sized pool in the backyard, the long driveway flanked by towering oak trees. Everything seemed normal, until it didn't. It was just a flicker, a shadow passing across the camera overlooking the back patio. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. When I looked again, everything was still. Must have been a trick of the light, I told myself, setting the tablet down. But the seed of doubt had been planted. The next hour crawled by. I found myself glancing at the tablet more frequently, a growing sense of unease gnawing at my insides. When I checked the cameras again, my heart nearly stopped. There, on the feed from the camera pointing at the side of the house, was a figure. It was hard to make out in the grainy night vision, but it was unmistakably human-shaped, and it was standing perfectly still, facing the house. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding. It had to be a mistake, right? Maybe a glitch in the system. I switched to the other cameras, but they all showed empty scenes. When I flipped back to the side camera, the figure was gone. My palms were sweaty as I gripped the tablet. I zoomed in on the spot where I'd seen the figure, searching for any sign of movement. Nothing, just the gentle sway of branches in the night breeze. I tried to calm myself down. It was probably just my imagination running wild. Too many late-night horror movies, that's all. But as I settled back onto the sofa, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The house creaked and groaned around me, sounds that would normally fade into the background now amplified by my frayed nerves. Every shadow seemed to move, every reflection in the windows a potential threat. When the clock struck 11, I almost didn't want to look at the cameras. But I forced myself to pick up the tablet, my finger hovering over the screen for a moment before I swiped to the first feed. Front lawn, clear. Backyard, empty. Side of the house, nothing. I let out a shaky breath. See? Nothing to worry about. I was about to set the tablet down when something caught my eye. The camera in the upstairs hallway, the one outside Oliver's room. There was someone standing there. The figure was tall, shrouded in shadows. It stood motionless at the end of the hallway, its face hidden from view. I felt the blood drain from my face as I stared at the screen, willing it to be another trick of the light, a glitch, anything but real. But it didn't disappear. It didn't move. It just stood there, a silent sentinel in the darkness. My mind raced. Oliver was in that room. I had to do something. But what? Call the police? What if it was nothing? What if I was just seeing things? I switched to the camera inside Oliver's room. The little boy was still fast asleep, his chest rising and falling peacefully. No sign of any intruder. When I flipped back to the hallway camera, The figure was gone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the tablet. I stood up, my legs wobbly beneath me. I had to check on Oliver. I had to make sure he was safe. The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed them, each step feeling like a mile. The hallway loomed ahead, dark and forbidding. I flicked on the light switch, half expecting to see the shadowy figure standing there. But the hallway was empty. I crept towards Oliver's room, my heart thundering in my chest. The door was ajar, just as I'd left it earlier. I pushed it open slowly, wincing at the slight squeak of the hinges. Oliver was still asleep, his stuffed giraffe clutched tightly to his chest. I let out a sigh of relief, feeling some of the tension leave my body. It was all in my head. Everything was fine. I was about to leave when I noticed something. The window was open. I was sure I'd closed it earlier when I put Oliver to bed. A chill ran down my spine as I approached it, the cool night air brushing against my skin. I leaned out, scanning the grounds below. The moonlight cast long shadows across the lawn, turning familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. As I was about to pull back, a movement caught my eye. There, by the old oak tree, was the figure. It stood perfectly still, its face turned up towards me. I gasped, stumbling backward. In my haste, I knocked over a lamp, the crash echoing through the quiet house. Oliver stirred in his sleep but didn't wake. I rushed to the door, my heart in my throat. I had to get him out of here. We weren't safe. As I reached for Oliver, the baby monitor crackled to life. A voice, low and gravelly, came through the speaker. "I see you." I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. The voice wasn't coming from Oliver's room. It was coming from downstairs, from the living room where I'd been sitting. With shaking hands, I scooped Oliver into my arms. He mumbled sleepily, but didn't resist. I held him close, feeling his warmth against my chest as I edged towards the door. The hallway was still empty, but now every shadow seemed to hide a threat. I made my way to the stairs, each creak of the floorboards sounding like a gunshot in the silence. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I heard it. Footsteps, coming from the kitchen. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed through the house. I clutched Oliver tighter, my eyes darting around for an escape route. The front door was just a few feet away. If I could make it there. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I could hear heavy breathing now, ragged and animalistic. My legs felt like lead, but I forced myself to move. 1 step, 2 steps. The front door loomed ahead, a beacon of safety in this nightmare. I reached for the handle, my fingers brushing against the cool metal. Just as I was about to turn it, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I screamed, spinning around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty. Not wasting another second, I wrenched the door open and ran into the night. The cool air hit me like a slap to the face, jolting me fully awake. I ran down the driveway, my bare feet slapping against the pavement. I didn't stop running until I reached the guardhouse at the entrance of the gated community. The security guard looked startled as I burst in, wild-eyed and clutching a sleeping child. "Call the police," I gasped out between ragged breaths. "There's someone in the house." The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars, flashing lights, concerned neighbors peering out of windows. The Thompsons arrived home in a panic, Mrs. Thompson pulling Oliver from my arms and checking him over frantically. The police searched the house from top to bottom. They found no sign of an intruder, no forced entry, nothing out of place. The security footage showed no mysterious figures, no open windows, no shadowy forms in the hallway. "Are you sure you saw something?" The detective asked me for what felt like the 100th time. "It wasn't just your imagination," I wanted to scream. I knew what I'd seen. I knew what I'd heard. But with each passing minute, with each skeptical look, I began to doubt myself. Had it all been in my head? As the night wore on and the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion set in. The Thompsons were gracious, offering to drive me home, but I couldn't bear to spend another minute in that house. I called a cab instead. As I waited on the front steps, Mrs. Thompson approached me. "I'm so sorry about all this," she said, her voice low. "We should have warned you." I looked at her, confusion and fear warring inside me. "Warned me about what?" She glanced around nervously before leaning in close. "The house. It plays tricks sometimes. Shows you things that aren't there. We hoped it had stopped." Before I could respond, my cab arrived. Mrs. Thompson pressed some extra cash into my hand, mumbling about trauma and therapy, but I barely heard her. My mind was reeling from her words. As the cab pulled away, I looked back at the house. In an upstairs window, I saw a figure watching me. Tall, shrouded in shadow, and beside it, a smaller figure, a child. I blinked, and they were gone. But the image stayed with me, burned into my memory. A reminder that sometimes, the things we see in the shadows are all too real. I never babysat for the Thompsons again, but sometimes, on dark nights when the wind howls outside my window, I find myself reaching for a tablet, an urge to check cameras I know aren't there. And in those moments, I wonder what else might be lurking just out of sight, waiting to be seen. The forest always felt like home to me, until the day it betrayed me. I've been hiking these trails since I was a kid, but today was different. The air was thick with an unseen tension, the usual chorus of birdsong replaced by an eerie silence. I should have turned back then, should have listened to that primal instinct screaming at me to run. But curiosity has always been my downfall. It started innocently enough. I was running late, my weekend hike delayed by an unexpected work call. By the time I hit the trailhead, the sun was already dipping below the tree line, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. I knew I wouldn't have time for my usual route, but I was determined to get some fresh air and exercise. That's when I remembered the shortcut. It wasn't on any official map, just a local secret passed down through whispers and knowing nods, a narrow path that cut through the heart of the forest, shaving at least an hour off the usual loop. I'd always been curious about it, but never quite brave enough to try it. Until today. The path was barely visible, just a slight depression in the undergrowth. As I stepped off the main trail, the forest seemed to close in around me. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out what little daylight remained. I flicked on my headlamp, the beam cutting through the growing darkness like a knife. The silence was oppressive. No rustling leaves, no scurrying animals, not even the buzz of insects. Just the crunch of my boots on the forest floor and the sound of my own breathing, growing more ragged with each step. I'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I saw it. At first, I thought it was just an oddly shaped rock or a fallen tree. But as I got closer, my headlamp illuminated its true form. A door. A heavy metal door set into the side of a small hill, almost completely hidden by moss and vines. My heart raced. What the hell was a door doing out here in the middle of nowhere? My mind conjured up images of secret government facilities, hidden bunkers from some long-forgotten war. I knew I should keep walking, stick to the path, and get back before full dark. But that damn curiosity kicked in again. I approached cautiously, half expecting alarms to go off or armed guards to appear from the shadows. Nothing happened. The forest remained as silent as a grave. I reached out, my hand trembling slightly, and brushed away some of the moss covering the door. There was no handle, no visible lock, just smooth, cold metal. I pressed against it gently, not really expecting anything to happen. To my shock, it swung open with a low, ominous creak that echoed through the silent forest. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me, carrying with it the faint scent of something I couldn't quite place. Something unpleasant. I hesitated at the threshold, common sense warring with curiosity. In the end, curiosity won out. I stepped inside, my headlamp barely penetrating the thick darkness. The beam of light revealed a long corridor, its walls made of rough concrete. The air was heavy and damp, making it difficult to breathe. I moved forward slowly, my footsteps echoing off the walls. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, with no turns or doors in sight. Just as I was about to turn back, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake, the corridor opened up into a large room, and that's when I saw them. Boxes, dozens of them, stacked floor to ceiling. Some were cardboard, others metal, all of them covered in a thick layer of dust. My curiosity, already piqued, now went into overdrive. I approached the nearest stack, wiping away the dust from one of the boxes. There was no label, no marking of any kind. With shaking hands, I pried open the lid. What I saw inside made my blood run cold. Jewelry, watches, wallets, personal items that clearly didn't belong together. This wasn't some forgotten storage facility. This was a stash, a hiding place for stolen goods. I stumbled backward, my mind reeling. I needed to get out of here, to call the police, to do something. But as I turned to leave, I heard it. Voices, muffled at first, then growing clearer, coming from the corridor I'd just left. Panic surged through me. I looked around frantically for a place to hide, but the room was wide open, with nowhere to conceal myself. The voices were getting closer, accompanied now by the sound of footsteps. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets. In desperation, I dove behind a stack of boxes, making myself as small as possible. I switched off my headlamp, plunging myself into total darkness. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. The voices entered the room, accompanied by the harsh glare of flashlights. I could make out at least 3 distinct voices, all male, all angry. "I'm telling you, something's not right," one of them growled. The door was open. "You probably just forgot to close it properly last time," another replied, his tone dismissive. "I never forget," the first voice snapped back. "Someone's been here." I held my breath, pressing myself harder against the boxes. "Please," I thought, "please just leave. Check your stuff and go." But they didn't leave. Instead, they began moving through the room, their flashlights sweeping across the stacks of boxes. I could hear them opening lids, rustling through contents. "Everything seems to be here," the third voice said, speaking for the first time. "Maybe it was an animal. A bear could have pushed the door open." "A bear?" the second voice scoffed. "Out here? You're out of your mind." They continued to argue, their voices growing more heated. I remained frozen in my hiding spot, too terrified to move. My legs were starting to cramp, and I was finding it harder and harder to keep my breathing quiet. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, when I was sure I'd either scream or pass out, I heard something that made my blood freeze in my veins. A sneeze. My sneeze. The dust that had been coating everything had finally gotten to me. I'd tried to hold it in, but it had burst out before I could stop it. For a moment, everything went deadly silent. Then all hell broke loose. "There!" one of them shouted. "Behind those boxes." I didn't wait. I exploded from my hiding spot, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I knocked over stacks of boxes as I ran, hearing them crash to the floor behind me. The men were shouting, their flashlights dancing wildly across the walls. I reached the corridor and ran faster than I've ever run in my life. I could hear them behind me, their heavy footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming in protest. But I didn't dare slow down. I burst out of the door and into the forest, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. It was fully dark now, the forest a maze of shadows and looming trees. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Their voices were getting closer. They knew these woods, probably better than I did. I was lost, running on pure instinct and terror. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning in that frantic flight through the dark forest. At some point, I realized I couldn't hear them anymore. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. It wasn't until I burst out onto the main trail, the familiar path I should have stuck to in the first place, that I finally allowed myself to slow down. I bent over, hands on my knees, gulping in great lungfuls of air. My whole body was shaking, a mix of exhaustion and fading adrenaline. I made it back to my car in record time, constantly looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. It wasn't until I was on the highway, putting miles between me and that cursed forest, that I finally felt safe enough to think, what had I stumbled upon? A cache for thieves, a storage site for some criminal organization, and what would have happened if they had caught me? I drove straight to the police station, my hands shaking as I recounted my story to the skeptical officer at the desk. They took my statement, promised to investigate, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. A secret bunker in the woods, a hidden stash of stolen goods. It sounded crazy even to my own ears. In the days that followed, I waited anxiously for news, but there was nothing. No reports of a bunker being found, no arrests made. It was as if that night had never happened. But I knew it had. The scratches on my arms from the branches, the bruises on my legs from stumbling in the dark, they were proof. And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up in a cold sweat, convinced I can hear heavy footsteps approaching, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness of my room. I don't hike anymore. The forest, once my sanctuary, now feels like a threat. Every tree could be hiding a secret, every shadow concealing danger. I've learned the hard way that sometimes curiosity doesn't just kill the cat. Sometimes it nearly kills you. And sometimes, late at night when sleep eludes me, I find myself wondering, did I really escape? Or are they out there waiting, biding their time until I let my guard down? Because one thing I know for certain, in this world, there are secrets better left undiscovered, and some shortcuts lead to places you can never truly leave behind. I've always believed that a single act of kindness could change someone's life. I never imagined it could end mine. The night was pitch black, rain pelting my windshield with such force that my wipers could barely keep up. I was driving home after a late shift at the hospital, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The roads were empty, stretching out endlessly before me like a river of asphalt. That's when I saw him. A lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, drenched to the bone. In any other circumstance, I would have driven right past. My mother's voice echoed in my head, warning me about the dangers of picking up strangers. But something about the desperation in his posture, the way he hunched against the relentless rain, tugged at my heartstrings. I slowed down, my tires hissing on the wet road. As I pulled over, I caught a glimpse of his face in my headlights. He looked young, maybe mid-20s, with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed to shine with relief. I rolled down my window just a crack. "Where are you headed?" I called out over the sound of the rain. "Just trying to get to the next town," he replied, his voice barely audible above the storm. My car broke down a few miles back. I've been walking for hours. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the door lock. Every instinct told me to drive away, to leave this stranger in my rearview mirror. But the doctor in me couldn't bear the thought of leaving someone stranded in this weather. "Hop in," I said, unlocking the doors. "I can take you as far as Millbrook." He quickly slid into the passenger seat, bringing with him the smell of rain and something else I couldn't quite place. As we pulled back onto the road, I snuck a glance at him. Up close, he looked even younger, almost boyish despite the beard. His clothes were soaked through, clinging to his thin frame. "I'm Sarah," I said, trying to break the awkward silence that had settled between us. "Jake," he replied, offering a small smile. Thanks for stopping. Not many people would have done that. I shrugged, keeping my eyes on the road. I couldn't just leave you out there in this weather. It's not safe. We drove in silence for a while. The only sound, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof. I was acutely aware of Jake's presence beside me, the way he kept fidgeting in his seat, his eyes darting around the car. "So, what do you do, Sarah?" he asked suddenly, his voice startling me in the quiet car. "I'm a doctor," I replied. "Just finished a long shift at the hospital." He nodded, seemingly interested. That must be tough work, especially with everything going on in the world right now. I agreed, and we fell into an easy conversation about my job, the pandemic, the state of the world. Jake was articulate and seemed well-informed, which put me more at ease. Maybe I had been too quick to judge, too paranoid. We had been driving for about half an hour when Jake's demeanor suddenly changed. He became quieter, more agitated. His fingers drummed an erratic rhythm on his knee. "Everything okay?" I asked, glancing at him. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was low, almost a whisper. "We need to take a detour." I frowned, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. "What do you mean?" "There's a road coming up on the right. I need you to turn onto it." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "That's not the way to Millbrook," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I thought that's where you were headed." Jake's hand moved, and suddenly there was a knife in it, the blade glinting in the dim light of the dashboard. My breath caught in my throat. "Turn right," he said, his voice no longer friendly. Now, my mind raced, trying to process what was happening. The kind, articulate young man was gone, replaced by someone cold and dangerous. I considered my options. I could try to grab the knife, but that would likely end with one or both of us injured. I could try to crash the car, but at these speeds, that could be fatal. With shaking hands, I turned onto the narrow road he had indicated. It was unpaved, more of a dirt track than a proper road. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches scraping against the car like skeletal fingers. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to stay calm. "Just drive," Jake snapped, the knife never wavering. We drove for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes. The rain had eased to a drizzle, but the night seemed darker than ever out here, away from the lights of the highway. "Stop here," Jake commanded. I brought the car to a halt in a small clearing. The headlights illuminated a decrepit old barn, its wood gray with age and neglect. "Get out," Jake said, gesturing with the knife. On shaky legs, I stepped out of the car. The ground was muddy, sucking at my shoes. Jake came around to my side, the knife pressed against my back. "Walk," he ordered, pushing me towards the barn. As we approached, I could smell the musty odor of rotting wood and damp hay. The large doors creaked ominously as Jake pushed them open. The interior of the barn was pitch black. Jake fumbled with something, and suddenly a harsh fluorescent light flickered to life, revealing a scene that made my blood run cold. The barn was filled with cages, and in those cages were people, men, women, even a few children, all huddled in small metal cages like animals, their eyes, wide with fear and desperation, turned to us as we entered. "What is this?" I gasped, my mind struggling to comprehend what I was seeing. Jake's hand gripped my arm painfully. "This," he said, his voice filled with a twisted pride, "is business." The reality of the situation hit me like a physical blow. Human trafficking. I had unwittingly delivered myself into the hands of human traffickers. "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "You don't have to do this. I won't say anything, I swear. Just let me go." Jake's laugh was cold and humorless. "Sorry, Doc. Can't do that. You see, we've got a buyer who's very interested in someone with your qualifications." He began to drag me towards an empty cage. I struggled, my doctor's instinct to do no harm warring with my desperate need to survive. In that moment of internal conflict, I made a decision. I stopped resisting, letting my body go slack. Jake, caught off guard by my sudden compliance, loosened his grip for just a second. It was all I needed. I drove my elbow back into his solar plexus with all the force I could muster. As he doubled over, gasping for air, I kneed him in the face. The knife clattered to the ground. I didn't wait to see if he'd get up. I ran, faster than I've ever run in my life. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit, but I didn't look back. I couldn't. I burst out of the barn and into the rain, which had picked up again. The mud sucked at my feet, threatening to trip me with every step, but I kept going, driven by pure adrenaline and the desperate need to survive. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys with shaking hands. Just as I got the door open, I felt a hand grab my jacket. I screamed, lashing out blindly. My fist connected with something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slamming the door shut and locking it in one frantic motion. Jake's face appeared at the window, contorted with rage. He pounded on the glass, screaming obscenities. The engine roared to life, and I floored it. The car fishtailed in the mud before finding traction. As I sped away, I could see Jake and several others in my rearview mirror, growing smaller by the second. I drove like a mad woman, taking random turns, praying I was heading towards civilization. It wasn't until I saw the lights of a gas station that I finally allowed myself to breathe. I pulled in, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn off the engine. I stumbled into the store, probably looking like a lunatic with my wild eyes and mud-splattered clothes. "Please," I gasped to the startled clerk. "I need to call the police." The next few hours were a blur of police statements and hospital examinations. They found the barn, but it was empty. Jake and the others had cleared out, taking their victims with them. I couldn't go back to my old life after that night. How could I, knowing what I knew, knowing that there were people out there, suffering, while the rest of the world went about its business, oblivious? So I made a change. I still practice medicine, but now I work with organizations that help rescued trafficking victims. It's hard, heartbreaking work, but every life we save, every person we help rebuild their life, makes it worth it. Sometimes, on dark, rainy nights, I still see Jake's face at my car window. I still hear the desperation in the voices of those caged people, but those memories don't paralyze me anymore. They drive me, because now I know the truth. A single act of kindness can change someone's life, but so can a single act of courage. And I choose courage every single day. The wilderness has always been my escape, but on that fateful night, it became my prison. I'd been planning this solo camping trip for months. Work had been suffocating. My relationship had just ended, and I needed to clear my head. Just me, my tent, and the great outdoors. No cell phone signal, no emails, no responsibilities. It was supposed to be perfect. The first 2 days were everything I'd hoped for. I hiked deep into the backcountry, far from the designated campsites and well-worn trails. The solitude was intoxicating. By day, I explored hidden waterfalls and climbed rocky outcrops for breathtaking views. By night, I sat by my small campfire, watching the stars emerge in a sky unpolluted by city lights. On the third day, I found what I thought was the perfect spot to set up camp. A small clearing nestled between towering pines, with a babbling brook nearby. I pitched my tent, gathered firewood, and settled in for the night, feeling more at peace than I had in years. I woke sometime in the middle of the night, disoriented. Something felt off. The forest, which had been alive with the sounds of nocturnal creatures, was eerily silent. I lay still in my sleeping bag, straining my ears. Nothing. Not even the rustle of leaves in the wind. Then I heard it, a twig snapping. just outside my tent. My heart began to race. It was probably just an animal, I told myself. A deer, maybe, or a raccoon looking for food. But deep down, I knew this was different. The footsteps, and I was certain now they were footsteps, were too deliberate, too measured to be an animal. I held my breath, hoping that whatever, or whoever it was, would move on. The footsteps circled my tent slowly, methodically. Once, twice. On the third pass, they stopped right by the entrance. I was frozen, paralyzed by fear. My mind raced through possible scenarios, each more terrifying than the last. A bear? A psychopath? Some hybrid of the two spawned by my panicked imagination. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps resumed, moving away from my tent and fading into the distance. I let out a shaky breath, my body trembling with residual adrenaline. Sleep was impossible after that. I lay awake, jumping at every sound, real or imagined. As the first light of dawn filtered through the tent fabric, I finally allowed myself to relax. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, the sun was high in the sky. I unzipped the tent, blinking in the bright daylight. Everything looked normal. Birds were singing. The brook was gurgling cheerfully. I almost convinced myself that the night's terror had been nothing more than a vivid nightmare. Almost, because there, circling my tent, were footprints. Human footprints. My blood ran cold as I examined them. They were fresh, the edges still crisp in the soft earth, and they were big, much bigger than my own. Someone had definitely been here, watching me as I slept. I quickly packed up my gear, my hands shaking so badly I could barely roll up my sleeping bag. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig made me flinch. I needed to get out of here, back to civilization, back to safety. But as I shouldered my backpack and turned to leave, I realized with growing horror that I didn't know which way to go. In my panic, I had lost all sense of direction. The forest that had seemed so welcoming just yesterday now felt oppressive, hostile. I picked a direction that felt right and started walking, trying to keep my pace steady despite the urge to run blindly through the woods. I hiked for hours, the sun moving across the sky, but nothing looked familiar. I should have reached a trail by now, or at least some sign of human presence. But there was nothing. As the day wore on, a new fear began to creep in. What if I couldn't find my way out? What if I was walking in circles? The forest seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction, each tree indistinguishable from the last. The sun was setting when I finally admitted to myself that I was hopelessly lost. I needed to make camp for the night and try again in the morning. With a heavy heart, I found a small clearing and began to set up my tent. That's when I noticed it. My gear had been rearranged in my backpack. Items that I always kept in certain pockets were in different places. Someone had gone through my things while I slept. Panic clawed at my throat. I wasn't just lost. I was being hunted. I abandoned the idea of setting up camp. Instead, I climbed a large tree, securing myself to a high branch with some rope. It wasn't comfortable, but at least I'd be off the ground, harder to reach. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill. I huddled in my jacket, straining my eyes and ears for any sign of my stalker. The forest was alive with sounds, the hoot of an owl, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. But underneath it all was something else, something that didn't belong. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps moving through the forest below. I held my breath, pressing myself against the tree trunk, praying that the darkness would hide me. The footsteps paused directly beneath my tree. I could hear breathing now, deep and rhythmic. Then a voice spoke, low and gravelly. "I know you're up there. Why don't you come down? We need to talk." Terror gripped me. How had he found me? What did he want? My mind raced through options, but there were none. I was trapped. No. The voice continued when I didn't respond. "That's okay. I can wait. I'm very patient." True to his word, he settled at the base of the tree. I could hear him moving around, getting comfortable. He started to whistle, a cheery tune that felt obscene in the oppressive darkness. Hours passed. My body ached from staying in one position for so long, but I didn't dare move. The whistling had stopped, replaced by the soft sounds of snoring, but I knew better than to think he was really asleep. As the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I heard him stir. "Last chance," he called up. "Come down now, or things will get unpleasant." I remained silent, clinging to the hope that someone, anyone, would come along and save me. He sighed, a sound of exaggerated disappointment. "Have it your way." There was a new sound then, a rhythmic thudding. It took my exhausted brain a moment to realize what it was. He was chopping down the tree. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I had. I untied myself from the branch and began to climb higher, desperately seeking thinner branches that wouldn't support his weight. The tree shuddered with each blow of the axe. I could hear the wood splintering, feel the vibrations running up through my hands and feet. It was only a matter of time before it fell. In that moment, faced with the inevitability of my capture, something inside me snapped. A primal, animalistic instinct took over. I wasn't going to die here, wasn't going to let this monster win. I unclipped my water bottle from my backpack and hurled it as hard as I could in the opposite direction. It crashed through the branches, making enough noise to sound like a person moving through the trees. The chopping stopped. "Trying to run," he called out, amusement in his voice. "Good luck." I heard him move away from the tree, in the direction of the noise. This was my chance. I scrambled down the tree as quietly as I could, my hands bleeding from the rough bark. The moment my feet touched the ground, I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, branches whipping my face, roots threatening to trip me at every step. But I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Behind me, I heard a roar of fury. He'd realized his mistake. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that desperate flight. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but still I pushed on. The sound of pursuit drove me forward, always seemingly just behind me. Just when I thought I couldn't take another step, I burst through the tree line and onto a road, a real paved road. In the distance, I could see cars approaching. I stumbled onto the asphalt, waving my arms frantically. A car screeched to a halt, the driver looking at me with a mixture of concern and fear. I must have been quite a sight. Wild-eyed, covered in dirt and blood, clothes torn. "Please," I gasped, collapsing against the car. "Help me. He's after me." The driver, a middle-aged woman, helped me into the car and sped off, already dialing 911 on her cell phone. As we drove away, I looked back at the forest. There, just at the edge of the trees, I saw a figure. Tall, broad-shouldered, watching us drive away. Even from a distance, I could feel the weight of his stare. The police took my statement, but they found no trace of my stalker. No campsite, no footprints, nothing. They chalked it up to an overactive imagination, a solo camper spooked by the noises of the forest. But I know what I saw, what I heard, what I felt. I don't go camping anymore. The wilderness that once brought me peace now fills me with dread. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself looking out my window at the distant trees, and I wonder if he's out there still, waiting, watching, patient. Because the thing that terrifies me most, the thought that keeps me awake at night, is this: what if he wasn't trying to hurt me? What if, in his twisted mind, he was trying to save me? And what if, someday, he decides to finish what he started? The wilderness was my escape. Now, it haunts my every waking moment. The moment I stepped into that lake house, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. But by then, it was already too late. I'd been dreaming of this getaway for months. The stress of my job in the city had been eating away at me, leaving me a hollow shell of my former self. When I stumbled across the listing for a quaint lake house rental, it seemed like the perfect escape. The photos showed a charming wooden cabin nestled among towering pines, with a deck overlooking a serene lake. It promised solitude, peace, and a chance to reconnect with myself. I booked it immediately, counting down the days until I could leave the chaos of the city behind. The drive up was beautiful, winding roads cutting through lush forests, the late afternoon sun dappling the pavement through the trees. As I turned onto the narrow dirt road leading to the cabin, a sense of excitement bubbled up inside me. This was exactly what I needed. The cabin looked just like the photos, perhaps a bit more weathered, but charming nonetheless. I parked my car and grabbed my bags, taking a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake and the whisper of wind through the trees. I climbed the creaky steps to the front porch, fishing the key out of my pocket. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a cozy interior bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. I stepped inside, ready to begin my week of relaxation. That's when I saw him. A man was sitting in an armchair by the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mixture of surprise and annoyance. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, rising from the chair. I froze, my mind racing. Had I gotten the dates wrong? Was this the owner? But no, I had the key. This was supposed to be my rental for the week. I'm sorry, I stammered. I rented this cabin for the week. There must be some mistake. The man's eyes narrowed. Rented? This is my house. I didn't rent it to anyone. My heart sank. I pulled out my phone, fumbling to find the rental confirmation email. "Look," I said, holding out the phone. "I have the reservation right here. It's for this address, for this week." He didn't even glance at the phone. "I don't care what that says. This is my house, and you're trespassing." I took a step back, suddenly very aware that I was alone in a remote cabin with an angry stranger. "Okay, I'm sorry. There's clearly been a mix-up. I'll just go and sort this out." I turned to leave, but his next word stopped me cold. "You're not going anywhere." I spun around to find him much closer than he had been before. In his hand was a knife, the blade glinting in the fading sunlight. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the couch with the knife. My legs felt like jelly as I sank onto the couch. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening. This had to be a nightmare. Any moment now, I'd wake up in my bed in the city, laughing at this absurd dream. But the cold fear in my gut told me this was all too real. "Please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "There's been a mistake. Just let me leave, and we can sort this out." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Oh, there's been no mistake. You're right where you're supposed to be." A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a trap, and I had walked right into it. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Company," he said simply. "It gets lonely out here, you know." For the next few hours, he talked. He told me about his life, about how he used to have a family, a job in the city, but it had all fallen apart. He spoke about the peace he found in the solitude of the mountains, but how sometimes the loneliness became too much to bear. All the while, the knife never left his hand, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. As night fell, he ordered me to make dinner. I moved around the small kitchen on shaky legs, hyper-aware of his eyes on me, of the knife that was always just within his reach. We ate in silence, the only sound the scraping of forks against plates. My mind was racing, trying to think of a way out. But he was between me and the door, and I had no idea how far it was to the nearest neighbor. Even if I could get out of the cabin, where would I go in the dark? Unfamiliar woods. After dinner, he led me to a small bedroom. "You'll sleep here," he said. "Don't get any ideas about leaving. I'm a light sleeper, and I'll know if you try anything." He locked the door from the outside, leaving me alone in the darkness. I didn't sleep that night. I lay on the bed, fully clothed, listening to every creak and groan of the old cabin. I tried the window, but it was nailed shut. The room was bare except for the bed and a small dresser. There was nothing I could use as a weapon, nothing I could use to escape. As the first light of dawn filtered through the window, I heard his footsteps approaching. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. "Good morning," he said, as if this was all perfectly normal. "Sleep well?" I nodded mutely, afraid of saying the wrong thing. The day passed in a surreal haze. He acted as if we were old friends on a vacation together, chatting about the weather, pointing out birds on the lake, but the knife was always there, a constant reminder of the truth. I played along, laughing at his jokes, answering his questions, all the while looking for an opportunity, any opportunity, to escape. It came on the third day. He was chopping wood outside, the rhythmic thunk of the axe echoing across the lake. I was inside, washing dishes, when I noticed his cell phone on the coffee table. My heart leapt. This was my chance. I glanced out the window. He was still busy with the wood, his back to the cabin. Moving as quietly as I could, I crept to the coffee table and grabbed the phone. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly dial. I punched in 911, praying he wouldn't come back inside. 911, what's your emergency? I opened my mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I was paralyzed with fear. Hello? Is anyone there? I took a deep breath, ready to pour out my story, when a hand clamped down on my shoulder. What do you think you're doing? The phone clattered to the floor. I turned to face him, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. His face was a mask of fury. I trusted you, he snarled. I thought we were becoming friends. Please, I begged, just let me go. I won't tell anyone, I swear. But I could see in his eyes that it was useless. Whatever humanity had been there before was gone now, replaced by a cold, hard anger. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in painfully, and started dragging me towards the door. I struggled, but he was much stronger than me. Where are we going? I gasped. He didn't answer, just kept pulling me along. We were heading towards the lake, the water dark and forbidding in the fading light. That's when I saw it. The boat. Small, weathered, barely big enough for two people. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, what he was planning. I planted my feet, trying to wrench my arm from his grasp. No, I said. Please, don't do this. He turned to me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Regret? Sadness. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. I'm sorry, he said, but I can't let you leave. I can't be alone again. We were at the edge of the water now. He shoved me roughly into the boat, climbing in after me. The little craft rocked dangerously as he started the motor. As we moved further from shore, I realized this might be my last chance. The water was cold, but it was better than whatever he had planned. I took a deep breath and lunged for the side of the boat. His hand shot out, grabbing my jacket, but the momentum was too much. We both tumbled into the icy water. The shock of the cold drove the air from my lungs. For a moment, I was disoriented, unsure which way was up. Then my survival instinct kicked in. I kicked hard, breaking the surface with a gasping breath. He was there too, spluttering and cursing. The boat was drifting away, the motor still running. Without thinking, I struck out for the shore. Every stroke was agony, my clothes weighing me down, the cold seeping into my bones. I could hear him behind me, his strokes powerful despite the cold. He was going to catch me. I was so close to the shore, but not close enough. Just as his hand closed around my ankle, my feet touched the bottom. With a surge of desperate energy, I lunged forward, breaking free of his grasp. I stumbled onto the shore, my legs barely holding me up. I ran. I ran like I had never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping my face. I had no idea where I was going, but anywhere was better than back there. I don't know how long I ran. It could have been minutes or hours. Eventually, I broke through the trees onto a road. A car was approaching, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. I waved my arms frantically, praying they would stop. The car slowed, then pulled over. An elderly couple peered out at me, their faces etched with concern. "Please," I gasped, "help me." They took me to the police station in the nearest town. The officers listened to my story with growing alarm. They sent out search parties, but they never found him. The cabin, when they reached it, was empty. No sign of a struggle. No evidence that anyone had been living there recently. Sometimes, I wonder if I imagined it all. If the stress and isolation had caused some kind of breakdown. But then I look at the scars on my arm, where his fingers dug in as he dragged me to the boat, and I know it was real. I don't take vacations anymore. The thought of being alone, away from the safety of the city, fills me with a terror I can't describe. But sometimes, when I look out at the sky on a clear night, I can't help but think of that lake, of the stars reflected on its still surface, and I wonder if he's out there somewhere, waiting, watching, looking for his next victim. Because the thing that terrifies me most, the thought that keeps me awake at night, is this: what if I wasn't the first? And what if I wasn't the last? The strings of the vintage Gibson hummed beneath my fingers, a siren song that drowned out the voice in my head screaming that something wasn't right. If I had only listened, maybe I wouldn't be here now, wondering if every shadow holds a threat, if every creak in my apartment is the sound of an intruder coming to finish what they started. But let me start from the beginning. I'm a collector of sorts. Vintage guitars are my passion, each one with its own history, its own soul. I spend hours scouring online marketplaces, hoping to find that hidden gem. That's how I stumbled upon the listing for a 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard, the holy grail of electric guitars. The price was too good to be true, but the photos looked authentic. The seller, Rick, had a compelling story about inheriting it from his uncle and not knowing its true value. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop downtown. I should have been more cautious, but the excitement of potentially owning such a legendary instrument clouded my judgment. Rick was already there when I arrived, guitar case by his side. He looked ordinary enough, mid-40s, slightly disheveled, with a friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. We made small talk as I examined the guitar. It was beautiful, the sunburst finish rich and deep, the mother-of-pearl inlays gleaming. "She's a beaut, isn't she?" Rick said, a note of pride in his voice. I nodded, running my fingers along the fretboard. "Mind if I plug her in?" He gestured to a small practice amp he'd brought. I connected the guitar and strummed a chord. The sound was incredible, warm, and full. This was the real deal. We negotiated a bit, but I ended up paying close to his asking price. It was still a steal for a guitar of this caliber. As I was packing up the guitar, Rick asked casually, "So, you live around here?" I hesitated for a moment, then told him I was just a few miles away. It seemed harmless enough at the time. I spent the rest of the day lost in the music, marveling at my new acquisition. It wasn't until evening that I noticed something odd. There was a car parked across the street, one I didn't recognize. A dark sedan, nondescript except for the fact that it had been there for hours. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease. I was being paranoid, right? But as the night wore on, the car remained. I found myself peeking through the blinds every few minutes, my heart racing each time I saw it was still there. Around midnight, I saw movement. A figure emerged from the car, crossing the street towards my building. The streetlight caught their face for just a moment, and my blood ran cold. It was Rick. I scrambled away from the window, my mind racing. What was he doing here? How did he know where I lived? I hadn't told him my exact address. The sound of the building's front door opening echoed through the quiet night. Footsteps on the stairs, slow and deliberate. My apartment was on the 3rd floor, and I counted each step with growing dread. The footsteps stopped outside my door. A moment of silence, then a soft knock. "Hello?" Rick's voice, friendly but with an undercurrent of something else. "I think you have something of mine." I remained frozen, hardly daring to breathe. "I know you're in there," he continued, his tone hardening. "Open up. We need to talk." My eyes darted to the guitar, sitting innocently in its case. What did he mean? Something of his? We'd made a fair deal. The knocking became more insistent. "Don't make this difficult. You don't know what you've got yourself into." I reached for my phone with trembling hands, ready to call the police. But as I dialed, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold, the scratch of a key in the lock. The door swung open, and there stood Rick, a twisted smile on his face. "Told you we needed to talk." I backed away, my phone clutched in my hand. How did you get a key?" He chuckled, stepping into the apartment and closing the door behind him. "I have my ways. Now, about that guitar." "We had a deal," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I paid you for it. It's mine now." Rick's eyes hardened. "The guitar was never for sale. It was bait, and you took it hook, line, and sinker." My mind reeled. "Bait? For what?" As if reading my thoughts, Rick continued, "That guitar, it's special, more special than you know. And there are people who want it very, very badly. People who will pay a lot more than what you gave me." He took a step closer, and I noticed for the first time the bulge under his jacket. A gun. "So here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're going to give me the guitar, and then you're going to forget this ever happened. Understand?" I nodded mutely, my eyes fixed on where I knew the gun was hidden. Slowly, I moved towards the guitar case. "That's it," Rick said, a note of triumph in his voice. "Nice and easy." As I reached for the case, my elbow knocked against a lamp on the side table. It toppled over, the crash deafening in the tense silence. Rick startled, his hand moving toward his concealed weapon. In that moment of distraction, I acted on pure instinct. I grabbed the guitar case and swung it with all my might. It connected with Rick's head with a sickening thud. He crumpled to the floor, unconscious. For a moment, I just stood there, my heart pounding, the guitar case still gripped tightly in my hands. Then reality set in. I had just assaulted someone who knew where I lived, who had a key to my apartment, who was mixed up in something dangerous. I had to get out of there. I grabbed a backpack, throwing in some clothes and essentials. I took the guitar too. Whatever was going on, it was clearly important. As I was about to leave, I noticed Rick stirring. Without thinking, I grabbed a roll of duct tape from my junk drawer and quickly bound his hands and feet. "I'm calling the police," I told him, trying to sound braver than I felt. "Don't try to follow me." I fled into the night, with no real plan beyond putting as much distance between myself and my apartment as possible. I drove for hours, my mind racing. Who were these people Rick had mentioned? What was so special about this guitar? I ended up in a small motel several towns over. As I sat on the lumpy bed, the guitar case beside me, I realized I was shaking. I opened the case, half expecting to find drugs or something hidden inside the guitar, but it looked normal. On a whim, I decided to play it. As my fingers touched the strings, I felt a jolt, like a static shock but stronger. And then, Nothing. The room was silent. I strummed again, but no sound came out. Confused, I checked the guitar, but everything seemed fine. That's when I noticed the TV in the corner had turned on, even though I hadn't touched it. On the screen was sheet music, notes dancing across the staff. As I watched, transfixed, I realized the notes matched exactly what I had just played. My mind struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Guitars don't do this. But here it was, happening right before my eyes. Suddenly, Rick's words made sense. This guitar was special. It could translate music into visual data, perhaps even store and transmit it. The implications were staggering. In the wrong hands, it could be used to hide and transport all kinds of encrypted information. No wonder people were after it. I spent the next few days on the move, never staying in one place for long. I tried to research the guitar, but found nothing. Whoever had created it had kept it well hidden. It was on the 5th day that I saw the black sedan again. Different plate, but I knew it was them. They had found me. I managed to slip away, but it was a close call. Too close. I realized then that this would never end. As long as I had the guitar, they would keep coming. So I made a decision. I found a secure storage facility 2 states over and locked the guitar away. Then I disappeared. New name, new look, new life. But I can never truly relax. Every time I see a vintage guitar, my heart races. Every time I hear a Les Paul's distinctive tone, I look over my shoulder because I know they're still out there, searching. And I know that one day they might find me. The music stopped that night in the motel room, but the danger never ended. Sometimes, in my dreams, I hear the ghostly strains of that Gibson, playing a melody that sounds like a warning, and I wake up, reaching for a guitar that's no longer there, wondering if I'll ever feel safe again. The first gunshot shattered more than just the tranquil forest air. It obliterated my naive belief that nature was a sanctuary from the darker aspects of humanity. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to how it all began, to the day when a simple hike turned into a nightmare that still haunts my dreams. It was supposed to be a perfect day. My friends and I had been planning this hike for weeks, eager to escape the suffocating heat of the city and lose ourselves in the cool embrace of the mountain forests. There were 4 of us, me, Jake, Sarah, and Mike. We'd been friends since college, bonded by our love for the outdoors and adventure. The trail we chose was off the beaten path, a local secret that promised breathtaking views and peaceful solitude. We set off early, the morning mist still clinging to the trees as we began our ascent. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. Birds called to each other in the canopy above, and a sense of excitement buzzed between us. "I can't believe we have this all to ourselves," Sarah said, her eyes bright with wonder as she took in the lush greenery surrounding us. Jake grinned, adjusting his backpack. That's the beauty of insider knowledge. No tourists, no crowds, just us and nature. If only we had known how wrong he was. We had been hiking for about 3 hours when we first noticed something was off. The forest had grown quieter, the bird's song replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in on us from all sides. I remember feeling a chill run down my spine, despite the warmth of the day. "Guys," Mike said, his voice low, "do you hear that?" We all stopped, straining our ears. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, the sound of voices drifted through the trees. Rough, angry voices that seemed completely out of place in this peaceful setting. Before we could decide what to do, 3 men emerged from the undergrowth ahead of us. They were nothing like the friendly hikers we occasionally encountered on trails. These men were rough-looking, with hard eyes and clothes that had seen better days. Each of them carried a rifle. "Well, well," the tallest one said, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "What do we have here?" I felt Sarah tense beside me, her hand gripping my arm tightly. Jake stepped forward, always the diplomat of our group. "Hey there," he said, keeping his voice casual. "We're just passing through. Don't mean to disturb you." The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The one who had spoken, clearly the leader, turned back to us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You're trespassing," he said, his tone deceptively light. "This here's private property." I frowned, confusion momentarily overriding my fear. That can't be right. This trail's been here for years. It's public land. The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. The man's face darkened, his pretense of friendliness evaporating. "You calling me a liar, boy?" he growled, taking a step towards us. Jake quickly intervened. No, of course not. Look, this is clearly a misunderstanding. We'll just head back the way we came. No harm done." For a moment, I thought it might work. The men seemed to consider Jake's words, and I allowed myself to hope that we might walk away from this unscathed. But then the leader's eyes fell on Sarah, and something in his gaze made my blood run cold. "I don't think so," he said slowly. "You've seen too much. Can't have you running back to town, telling tales." That's when I noticed the fourth man, emerging silently from the trees behind us, cutting off our escape route. We were surrounded. What happened next is a blur in my memory. I remember Sarah's scream as one of the men grabbed her arm. I remember the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh as Mike tried to intervene and was struck with the butt of a rifle. And I remember the paralyzing fear that gripped me, rooting me to the spot as our idyllic hike descended into chaos. It was the gunshot that finally spurred me into action. The leader had fired into the air, the sound echoing through the forest like a crack of thunder. "Move," he ordered, gesturing with his rifle towards a barely visible path leading deeper into the woods. With no other choice, we complied. Sarah was sobbing quietly. Mike was unsteady on his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Jake and I exchanged glances, a silent agreement passing between us. We needed to find a way out of this. They marched us for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. The terrain became rougher, the trees pressing in closer. Eventually, we emerged into a small clearing. What I saw there made my heart sink. A ramshackle cabin stood in the center, surrounded by rusted vehicles and piles of debris. This wasn't just a chance encounter. These men lived here, hidden away from the world. "Inside," the leader barked, shoving Jake roughly towards the cabin. The interior was dark and musty, lit only by a few grimy windows. They herded us into what must have once been a living room, now cluttered with mismatched furniture and stacks of unidentifiable junk. "Sit," the leader commanded, gesturing to a threadbare couch. We obeyed, huddling together for comfort. For a long time, nothing happened. The men conferred in low voices in the corner, occasionally glancing our way. The tension was unbearable. What did they want with us? What were they going to do? As the light outside began to fade and the leader approached us again. "Here's how this is going to work," he said, his voice eerily calm. "You're going to tell us everything about yourselves, where you live, where you work, who your families are. And then, if we believe you're not a threat, we might let you go." The implication was clear. If they didn't believe us, or if they thought we might talk, we wouldn't be leaving this cabin alive. What followed was hours of interrogation. They separated us, questioning each of us in turn. I tried to keep my answers consistent, praying that the others were doing the same. The whole time, I was frantically trying to think of a way out, but every scenario I imagined ended with one or all of us dead. It was well past midnight when they finally seemed satisfied. They tied us up and left us in the main room of the cabin, two of the men standing guard while the others slept. I don't know how long I sat there, every muscle tense, my mind racing. Then, in the pre-dawn darkness, I heard it. A sound so faint I thought I might have imagined it. A helicopter. Our guards heard it too. They exchanged worried glances. Then one of them went to wake the others. In the ensuing confusion, I caught Jake's eye. This was our chance. Using the little slack in our bindings, we managed to work ourselves free. The sound of the helicopter was growing louder, and our captors were distracted, arguing amongst themselves. In a burst of desperate energy, we made our move. Jake tackled one of the guards, while Mike, despite his injuries, grappled with another. I grabbed Sarah's hand and we ran, bursting out of the cabin and into the gray dawn light. The forest was a blur as we ran, branches whipping at our faces, roots threatening to trip us at every step. Behind us, I could hear shouts and the sound of pursuit. The helicopter was louder now, definitely searching for something, or someone. We burst out of the tree line onto a logging road just as the helicopter appeared overhead. It was a police chopper, and at the sight of us, it began to descend. The next few hours passed in a daze of paramedics, police statements, and tearful phone calls to worried families. We learned later that the men were part of an anti-government group that had been living off the grid for years. They had been involved in everything from drug manufacturing to weapons smuggling. Our accidental discovery of their hideout had led to their downfall. It's been months since that day, but the memory of it still haunts me. I've tried hiking again, tried to recapture that sense of peace I once found in nature. But every snapping twig makes me flinch, every unexpected encounter on the trail sets my heart racing. The forest was once my escape, a place of beauty and tranquility. Now it's a reminder of how quickly paradise can become a prison, of how thin the veneer of civilization really is. I know that most people we meet are good, that what happened to us was a terrible exception. But that knowledge doesn't stop the nightmares, doesn't ease the panic that grips me when I find myself alone in the woods. They say time heals all wounds. I hope that's true. Because right now, the only thing I feel when I look at those distant, tree-covered mountains is fear. Fear. And a lingering question that I'm not sure I'll ever be able to answer. In those moments of terror, with our lives on the line, did we discover who we really are? And if so, can we ever go back to who we were before? The low rumble of thunder in the distance should have been my first warning, but it wasn't the approaching storm that would prove to be the real threat that night. No, the true danger came in the form of a good Samaritan, a helping hand that nearly dragged me into an abyss from which there would be no return. I had been driving for hours, the monotony of the highway broken only by the occasional flicker of lightning on the horizon. It was late, well past midnight, and I was exhausted. The conference had run long, and rather than stay another night in the city, I had decided to push through and drive home, a decision I would soon regret. The rain started as a light drizzle but quickly intensified into a torrential downpour. My wipers struggled to keep up, and visibility dropped to near zero. I leaned forward, squinting through the windshield, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. That's when it happened. A loud bang, followed by the sickening lurch of the car pulling to one side. A blowout. Cursing under my breath, I carefully maneuvered the car onto the shoulder. The rain was coming down in sheets now, drumming on the roof with an intensity that made it hard to think. I sat there for a moment, weighing my options. I had a spare tire, but the thought of changing it in this weather was far from appealing. Just as I was about to bite the bullet and step out into the storm, I saw headlights approaching in my rearview mirror. A large pickup truck slowed as it neared, then pulled in behind me, its hazard lights blinking in the gloom. Relief washed over me. Help had arrived. A figure emerged from the truck, hunched against the rain. As they approached my window, I rolled it down a crack. "Having some trouble?" a gruff voice asked. In the dim light, I could make out a man's face, weathered and lined with a scraggly beard and eyes that seemed to glint in the darkness. "Yeah," I replied, raising my voice to be heard over the storm. "Blowout. I've got a spare, but..." I gestured helplessly at the downpour. He nodded, understanding. "Pop the trunk. I'll give you a hand." Gratefully, I did as he asked. Together, we braved the elements, working quickly to jack up the car and replace the damaged tire. Despite the rain, his movements were sure and efficient. Clearly, he'd done this before. As we finished up, I tried to press some money into his hand, a token of my appreciation. He waved it away. "No need for that," he said, "just helping a fellow traveler." I was about to thank him again when he spoke up, his voice taking on a note of concern. "You know, that spare's not meant for long distances. There's a service station about 20 miles up the road. Why don't you follow me there? Make sure you get there safe." I hesitated. It was late, and I was eager to get home. But he had a point about the spare, and I didn't relish the thought of ending up stranded again, possibly in an area with less traffic. "All right," I agreed. "Lead the way." As I followed his truck down the dark highway, I felt a surge of gratitude for this unexpected kindness. It was reassuring to know that there were still good people in the world, willing to help a stranger in need. If only I had known then how wrong I was. We had been driving for about 15 minutes when I noticed something odd. The truck ahead was slowing down, and then, to my surprise, it turned off the highway onto a narrow side road. Confused, I followed. Maybe this was a shortcut to the service station. The road quickly deteriorated, becoming little more than a dirt track winding through dense forest. My unease grew with each passing minute. This couldn't be right. Finally, unable to shake the feeling that something was very wrong, I decided to turn back. But as I slowed to make a U-turn, the truck ahead suddenly stopped. The driver's door opened, and the man stepped out. In the harsh glare of my headlights, he looked different. The friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating, and in his hand, glinting dully in the rain, was a gun. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a good Samaritan. This was a trap, and I had driven right into it. "Get out of the car," he called, his voice no longer gruff but sharp with command. My mind raced. I was alone on a deserted road with an armed man who clearly had ill intentions. Fight or flight instinct kicked in, and I chose flight. I slammed the car into reverse, tires spinning in the mud as I tried to turn around. The spare tire, not designed for such maneuvers, squealed in protest. A gunshot rang out, the sound amplified in the enclosed space of the car. My windshield starred, a small hole appearing in the glass. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I managed to get the car turned around and floored the accelerator. The engine roared, and I shot down the muddy track, fishtailing wildly. In my rearview mirror, I could see the man running back to his truck. I had only seconds before he would be in pursuit. The drive back to the highway was a blur of terror and adrenaline. Every bend in the road filled me with dread, certain I would see headlights bearing down on me. The spare tire, pushed beyond its limits, began to shred, the car pulling dangerously to one side. By some miracle, I made it back to the highway, but my ordeal wasn't over. The spare was destroyed, the rim scraping on the asphalt sending up sparks, and behind me, gaining fast, were the headlights of the truck. I pushed the car as hard as I dared, praying that another vehicle would appear, that I would see lights of a town, anything. But the highway stretched on, dark and empty. The truck was almost on me now. I could see the man leaning out of his window, gun in hand. Another shot rang out, missing me but serving as a terrifying reminder of how precarious my situation was. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it. A sign for a rest area, just a mile ahead. My heart leapt. Where there was a rest area, there would be people. Safety. I made for the exit, the car lurching and swaying. The truck followed, gaining ground. As I pulled into the rest area, I laid on the horn, a long, continuous blast that shattered the night's silence. To my immense relief, there were other vehicles there. A few cars, and better yet, a semi-truck. People began to emerge, startled by the commotion. The truck behind me screeched to a halt. In my rearview mirror, I saw the man's face, contorted with rage and frustration. For a moment, I thought he might still come after me. But then, with a squeal of tires, he threw the truck into reverse and sped away, disappearing into the night. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police were called, statements were taken, my car was towed, the bullet holes in the windshield, a stark reminder of how close I had come to disaster. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the rest area, a police officer approached me. "You're lucky," he said, his face grim. "We've had reports of similar incidents in this area. Stranded motorists being targeted. Not all of them made it out." His words sent a chill through me. How many others had fallen for the same trap? How many hadn't been as fortunate as I was? In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself jumping at every sound, suspicious of every stranger. The highway, once a symbol of freedom and possibility, now felt like a gauntlet of hidden dangers. They never caught the man. Sometimes, when I'm driving at night and I see a truck in my rearview mirror, I feel that same panic rising in my throat. I have to remind myself that it's over, that I'm safe. But am I really? The experience taught me a harsh lesson about trust and the darkness that can lurk behind a seemingly helpful facade. It showed me how quickly a normal day can spiral into a fight for survival, how thin the line is between safety and mortal danger. I still drive, still take road trips. But now, I'm always watching, always alert. Because I know that out there on the dark highways, there are predators waiting. And sometimes, they come disguised as a helping hand. The thunder that night wasn't just a warning about the storm. It was a premonition of the tempest that would nearly consume me. A reminder that sometimes when the real monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in the shadows. Sometimes when they're standing right next to us, offering to change a tire in the rain. The flickering neon sign of the Starlight Motel should have been my first clue that this wasn't the safe haven I was seeking. But when you're running on fumes after a 12-hour drive, even the most dubious of lodgings can look like the Ritz. I'd been on the road since dawn, pushing through fatigue and caffeine jitters, determined to make it to my cousin's wedding. The smart thing would have been to stop hours ago, but I've never been accused of making smart choices. So there I was, bleary-eyed and desperate for a horizontal surface, pulling into the nearly empty parking lot of the only motel for miles. The office was a small, dimly lit room that smelled of stale cigarettes and desperation. Behind the counter stood a man who looked like he'd been rode hard and put away wet, as my grandfather used to say. His eyes, bloodshot and wary, gave me a once-over as I approached. "Need a room," I mumbled, fumbling for my wallet. He grunted, reaching for a key without taking his eyes off me. "Cash only. Checkout's at 11. I handed over the money, too tired to be put off by his brusque manner or the cash-only policy. He slid a key across the counter, attached to a faded plastic tag with the number 13. Great. Just my luck. The room was about what you'd expect from a place like this. Faded wallpaper, a bed that had seen better days, and a bathroom that I decided to avoid unless absolutely necessary. But it was a place to rest, and that's all I cared about at that moment. I collapsed onto the bed, not even bothering to take off my shoes. Sleep claimed me almost instantly, dragging me down into a deep, dreamless void. I'm not sure what woke me. Maybe it was a noise, or just that sixth sense that tells you something isn't right. My eyes snapped open, heart racing, though I couldn't have said why. The room was dark, the only light coming from the neon sign outside, casting an eerie red glow through the thin curtains. For a moment, I lay there, trying to orient myself, to remember where I was. Then I heard it, a soft, scraping sound coming from the door. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. The scraping continued, followed by a metallic click that I recognized with a jolt of fear. Someone was trying to unlock my door. Panic surged through me, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. I rolled off the bed as quietly as I could, crouching beside it. The door began to open, a sliver of light from the parking lot cutting through the darkness. A figure slipped into the room, their silhouette bulky and menacing in the gloom. I could hear their breathing, heavy and excited. This wasn't a maid or a confused guest. This was someone who meant harm. My eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The bathroom. If I could make it there, maybe I could lock myself in, buy some time. I began to inch towards it, my heart pounding so loud I was sure the intruder must hear it. I was halfway there when my foot caught on something. My own discarded shoe, I realized with horror. The noise, small as it was, might as well have been a gunshot in the silent room. The intruder's head snapped towards me, and I saw the glint of something in their hand. A knife. What happened next was pure instinct. I lunged for the bathroom, slamming the door shut behind me and fumbling for the lock. I heard a roar of frustration from the other side, followed by the thud of a body hitting the door. "Open up!" a voice snarled, deep and guttural. "There's no way out." He was right. The bathroom had no windows, no other exits. I was trapped. The door shuddered under another impact. It wouldn't hold for long. My mind raced, searching for a solution. The tiny window above the toilet caught my eye. It was small, probably too small, but it was my only chance. I climbed onto the toilet, my fingers scrabbling at the window latch. It was stuck, corroded with age and neglect. Behind me, the door splintered, a hand reaching through the gap. With a strength born of desperation, I wrenched at the window. It gave way suddenly, almost sending me tumbling backwards. I didn't hesitate. I dove headfirst through the opening, feeling the frame scrape along my back as I squeezed through. I tumbled to the ground outside, the impact knocking the wind out of me. But there was no time to recover. I scrambled to my feet, hearing the bathroom door finally give way behind me. I ran. Barefoot, gasping for breath, I sprinted across the parking lot towards the highway. Behind me, I heard a bellow of rage. He was coming. The highway stretched out before me, dark and empty. No cars, no lights, nothing. Just an endless ribbon of asphalt disappearing into the night. I ran along the shoulder, the rough ground cutting into my feet. Every few seconds, I glanced back, expecting to see my pursuer gaining on me. But the road behind me remained empty. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, I saw lights in the distance, a gas station, its fluorescent glare a beacon of hope in the darkness. I pushed myself harder, ignoring the burning in my legs, the rawness of my throat. As I staggered into the pools of light cast by the gas station, a car pulled up to one of the pumps. An older couple stepped out, their faces changing from surprise to concern as they took in my disheveled appearance. "Please," I gasped. "Call the police. Someone at the motel." He tried to. I couldn't get the words out, but I didn't need to. The woman was already on her phone, speaking urgently to a 911 operator. The man guided me inside the store, his voice gentle as he asked if I was hurt. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars arrived, their sirens shattering the night's quiet. I gave my statement, my voice shaky as I recounted what had happened. They found my shoes and wallet still in the motel room, but of my attacker, there was no sign. The motel owner was arrested. It turned out this wasn't the first incident. He had been working with a local criminal, providing him with victims, tired travelers, easy targets. The thought of how close I had come to becoming another statistic made me sick. As dawn broke, painting the sky in soft pinks and golds, a police officer approached me. "We found this in the motel office," he said, holding out a familiar key. The plastic tag still read 13, but now it seemed less like an unlucky number and more like a reminder of my narrow escape. I took the key, its weight feeling significant in my hand. A reminder of how quickly life can change, how thin the line is between safety and danger. The wedding was forgotten. I couldn't face the thought of more travel, more strange places. I just wanted to go home, to lock myself away in familiar surroundings. But even as I made my way back, I knew things would never be the same. The world had revealed a darker side, one I couldn't unsee. Every motel sign now seemed sinister, every strange face a potential threat. I still travel sometimes, when I have to, but now I plan obsessively, researching every stop, every hotel. I carry a personal alarm and a can of pepper spray. I check the locks 3, 4, 5 times before I go to sleep. Some might call it paranoia. I call it survival. Because now I know the truth. Danger doesn't always announce itself with flashing signs and ominous music. Sometimes it hides behind a friendly smile and a room key. Sometimes the real monsters are the ones who are supposed to keep us safe. That night at the Starlight Motel taught me a lesson I'll never forget. In this world, trust is a luxury we can't always afford. And sometimes, the difference between life and death is as simple as a stuck window latch and a tiny bathroom window. I often find myself thinking about that key, wondering how many others like it are out there, waiting to unlock doors to rooms where nightmares become reality. And I wonder about the people who hold those keys, the seemingly ordinary folks who harbor extraordinary evil. The neon sign of the Starlight Motel no longer flickers. The place was shut down, its dark secrets exposed to the light of day, but somewhere out there, another sign is flickering. Another tired traveler is checking in, another predator is waiting, and all I can do is hope that they, too, find a way to escape through their own metaphorical bathroom window. Because in the end, that's all we can do. Keep running, keep fighting, and never, ever take safety for granted again. The shutter of my camera echoed through the abandoned building like a gunshot, and in that moment, I realized I had made a terrible mistake. But let me start from the beginning, before the fear, before the chase, before I learned that some places are abandoned for a reason. I've always been drawn to the beauty of decay. There's something hauntingly poetic about abandoned places, the stories they hold, the whispers of lives once lived. As an urban explorer and photographer, I've made it my mission to document these forgotten spaces, to capture the eerie allure of a world reclaimed by nature and time. The old ironworks factory on the outskirts of town had been on my bucket list for years. A sprawling complex of brick and steel, it had stood silent for decades, its windows dark and empty, its machinery frozen in time. Getting in wasn't easy. The place was surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, clear warnings against trespassers posted every few feet. But I was determined. I had scouted the location for weeks, noting the patterns of the security patrols, searching for weak points in the perimeter. Finally, on an overcast Sunday afternoon, I made my move. Slipping through a gap in the fence I had discovered earlier, I found myself standing in the shadow of the massive factory. My heart raced with a mixture of excitement and apprehension as I approached the main building, my camera bag heavy on my shoulder. The lock on the side door gave way easily to my picks, a skill I'm not proud of, but one that served me well in my explorations. As I stepped inside, the musty smell of abandonment enveloped me. Dust motes danced in the pale light streaming through broken windows, and the silence was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. I moved through the building slowly, reverently, my camera capturing every rust-stained machine, every crumbling wall, every patch of graffiti left by those who had come before me. The place was a gold mine for someone like me, each room offering new treasures to photograph. I lost track of time as I worked, so engrossed in my art that I failed to notice the changing quality of light as afternoon gave way to evening. It wasn't until I found myself squinting to adjust my camera settings that I realized how late it had gotten. Cursing under my breath, I decided to take just a few more shots before heading out. That's when I heard it, a sound so out of place in the abandoned factory that at first, I thought I had imagined it. Voices, low and muffled, but unmistakably human. I froze, my camera halfway to my face. This was bad. Very bad. Urban exploration came with risks. Unstable structures, toxic materials, the occasional run-in with other explorers or homeless individuals seeking shelter. But something about these voices set off alarm bells in my head. Carefully, I crept towards the source of the sound, my curiosity overriding my common sense. As I got closer, I could make out fragments of conversation. Shipment coming in tonight. Boss wants it moved quickly. Can't risk another screw-up. My blood ran cold as realization dawned. This wasn't just a case of other trespassers or squatters. I had stumbled onto something much more dangerous. I began to back away slowly, desperate to get out unnoticed. But in my haste, I knocked against an old metal drum. The resulting clang seemed to echo forever in the cavernous space. The voices stopped abruptly. What was that? Check it out. Panic surged through me. I turned to run, no longer caring about stealth. Behind me, I could hear footsteps, fast and purposeful. I sprinted through the factory, my heart pounding in my ears. I had explored extensively earlier, but now, in my panic, every corridor looked the same. I took random turns, praying I was heading towards an exit. A shout behind me told me I had been spotted. The footsteps grew louder, more numerous. How many were there? I burst through a set of double doors into what must have been the main production floor. Massive machinery loomed in the gloom, creating a maze of metal and shadows. I weaved between the hulking shapes, desperately searching for a way out. A gunshot rang out, the sound amplified in the enclosed space. I ducked instinctively, nearly losing my footing on the debris-strewn floor. "Stop right there," a voice bellowed, "or the next one won't miss." I didn't stop. I couldn't. Adrenaline pushed me forward, my legs pumping furiously. I spotted a staircase leading up and took it without hesitation, taking the steps two at a time. The upper level was a maze of catwalks and offices. I could hear my pursuers on the stairs behind me, their angry shouts spurring me on. I ran down a long corridor, trying doors as I passed. All locked. At the end of the hall, I found salvation, a door that opened to my touch. I burst through, ready to continue running, only to find myself on a small balcony overlooking the factory floor. A dead end. Panic clawed at my throat as I realized my mistake. The footsteps were getting closer. I was trapped. In desperation, I looked over the railing. It was a long drop to the factory floor, but I spotted a pile of what looked like old tarps or canvas not too far below. It was a crazy idea, born of fear and adrenaline, but it was my only chance. I heard the door behind me burst open just as I vaulted over the railing. For a moment, I was falling, the wind rushing past my ears. Then I hit the pile with bone-jarring force. Pain exploded through my body, but there was no time to assess the damage. I rolled off the pile, my legs nearly buckling as I stood. Above me, I could hear angry shouts and the thunder of feet on metal as my pursuers realized what I had done. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I forced myself to run. I had lost my bearings in the fall, but I moved on instinct, ducking between machines, always heading away from the voices behind me. Finally, mercifully, I saw it, the door I had entered through, hours and a lifetime ago. With a last burst of speed, I threw myself at it, tumbling out into the cool night air. But I wasn't safe yet. I could hear them behind me, closing in. I ran across the open yard towards the fence, my lungs burning, every step sending jolts of pain through my battered body. I reached the fence and began to climb, the metal links biting into my hands. As I reached the top, I felt something snag my jacket. Looking down, I saw barbed wire wrapped around the fabric. In my earlier scouting, I had found a section where the wire was missing. In my panic, I had climbed the wrong section. A hand grabbed my ankle. With a cry of fear and pain, I wrenched myself free, feeling my jacket tear as I tumbled over the other side of the fence. I hit the ground hard but forced myself up, running blindly into the night. I don't know how long I ran or how far. All I know is that eventually, I found myself on a busy street. The normal sounds of traffic and pedestrians a jarring contrast to the terror I had just escaped. I never went to the police. How could I explain what had happened without admitting to trespassing? And somehow, I knew that what I had stumbled upon was bigger and more dangerous than anything the local cops could handle. My camera, with all its incriminating evidence, was lost somewhere in that factory. Sometimes I wonder if they found it, if they saw the photos I had taken, if they now know my face. I don't do urban exploration anymore. The thrill of discovery, the artistry of decay, it all seems hollow now, tainted by the memory of that night. Every abandoned building I see is no longer a potential subject, but a potential threat. Every shadow could be hiding something sinister. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still hear those footsteps chasing me through the darkness. I can still feel the rush of air as I fell from that balcony, the bite of the fence as I climbed to freedom. I escaped that night, but a part of me never left that factory. It remains there, trapped in the shadows, forever running, forever afraid. Because now I know that not all abandoned places are truly empty, and sometimes the most dangerous things are the ones we can't see until it's too late. The beauty of decay, it's an illusion. Behind the crumbling walls and rusted machinery, darkness lurks. And once you've seen it, truly seen it, you can never unsee it again. The moment I saw her eyes widen in fear, I knew I had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple motel stopover. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the night when a cheap room and a desperate need for sleep led me down a path I never could have imagined. It was just past midnight when I pulled into the parking lot of the Pinewood Motel. The neon sign flickered weakly, half the bulbs burned out, but it was the only lodging I'd seen for miles. I'd been driving for 14 hours straight, my eyes heavy with exhaustion, my body aching from being cramped in the car. The night clerk barely looked up as I entered the office, the bell above the door jingling discordantly. He was an older man, balding and paunchy, with nicotine-stained fingers that trembled slightly as he pushed the registration card towards me. "Just passing through?" he asked, his voice gravelly from years of smoking. I nodded, scribbling my details on the card. "Long drive. Need to crash for the night," he grunted, taking the card back and handing me a key attached to a faded plastic fob. "Room 12, end of the row. Checkouts at 11. I mumbled my thanks and headed back out into the night. The motel was a single-story affair, a long row of identical doors facing the parking lot. My room was at the far end, away from the office and the handful of other cars parked outside occupied rooms. The room itself was about what you'd expect from a place like this. Faded wallpaper, a bed that had seen better days, and a bathroom that I decided to avoid unless absolutely necessary. But it was a place to rest, and that's all I cared about at that moment. I was about to collapse onto the bed when I heard it. A muffled thump from the room next door, followed by what sounded like a stifled cry. I froze, listening intently. For a moment, all was quiet. Then I heard it again, clearer this time. A woman's voice, laced with fear. "Please don't." The words were cut off abruptly, followed by another thump. My heart began to race. Was I hearing what I thought I was hearing? Should I call the front desk? The police? Before I could decide, I heard the sound of a door opening and closing. Cautiously, I peered out my window. A man was walking briskly towards the parking lot, his face hidden in the shadows. He got into a car and drove off, the taillights disappearing into the night. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. It could have been nothing, I told myself. A lover's quarrel, perhaps. But something in my gut told me it was more than that. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of my room and approached the door of room 11. I hesitated for a moment, then knocked softly. "Hello? Is everything okay in there?" No response. I knocked again, louder this time. Hello? I'm in the next room. I just wanted to make sure you're all right. I heard movement inside, then the sound of the lock turning. The door opened a crack, and I found myself looking into the terrified eyes of a young woman. Are you okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and reassuring. She glanced nervously over her shoulder, then back at me. You need to go, she whispered. It's not safe. What's going on? Are you in trouble? I can call for help. No, she hissed, her eyes widening in panic. No police. They'll kill her if you call the police. Kill who? What's happening? She seemed to make a decision then, opening the door wider. Come in, quickly. I slipped into the room, my heart pounding. The interior was identical to my own, but there was an air of desperation here that was palpable. Clothes were strewn about, and I noticed a small suitcase tucked half under the bed. The woman, barely more than a girl, really, sank onto the bed, her shoulders slumped in defeat. I'm Sarah, she said softly, and I think I'm going to die here. Over the next few minutes, Sarah told me a story that chilled me to the bone. She had been hitchhiking, trying to get to her sister's place a few states over, when a seemingly kind truck driver had offered her a ride. But instead of taking her where she wanted to go, he had brought her here, to this motel in the middle of nowhere. There are others, she said, her voice trembling. Girls like me. They keep us here, move us around. The motel owner, he's in on it. They sell us. Human trafficking. The words echoed in my mind, filling me with a mixture of horror and rage. How could this be happening here, in a quiet motel off the highway? We need to get you out of here, I said, my mind racing. My car's just outside. We can leave right now. Sarah shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I can't. They have my little sister. They showed me pictures. Said if I try to run, they'll hurt her. I felt sick. This was so much bigger, so much worse than I had imagined. Okay, I said, trying to think. Okay, we need a plan. Is there anyone you trust? Anyone who can help your sister while we get you to safety? Sarah hesitated, then nodded slowly. My aunt. She's a cop in my hometown, but I don't know her number, and they took my phone. I have a phone, I said, reaching for it. We can call her, explain the situation. She can help your sister while we figure out how to get you out of here. Just as I was about to dial, we heard the sound of a car pulling into the parking lot. Sarah's face went pale. He's back, she whispered. You have to go. Please, just forget about this. Forget you ever saw me. But I couldn't. The thought of walking away, of leaving her to this fate, was unthinkable. I'm not leaving you, I said firmly. We're getting out of here, both of us. Now. What happened next was a blur of adrenaline and fear. We slipped out of the room, keeping to the shadows. My car was just a few doors down, tantalizingly close. But as we crept towards it, a shout rang out behind us. Hey, stop right there! We ran. Sarah's hand was cold in mine as we sprinted across the parking lot. I fumbled with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. Behind us, I could hear heavy footsteps getting closer by the second. Finally, the door opened. We tumbled inside, and I jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life just as a hand slammed against the driver's window. A face loomed out of the darkness, contorted with rage. I floored it. The tires screeched as we peeled out of the parking lot, the motel receding in the rearview mirror. But our ordeal wasn't over. Headlights appeared behind us, gaining fast. The next hour was the most terrifying of my life. We sped down dark country roads, the pursuing vehicle always just behind us. Sarah was on the phone with her aunt, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. I kept my eyes on the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, praying we'd find help before our luck ran out. It was the longest night of my life, but eventually, We saw flashing lights ahead. A police roadblock. Sarah's aunt had come through. As we pulled to a stop, surrounded by the safety of law enforcement, the reality of what we'd just been through hit me like a tidal wave. Sarah broke down, sobbing with relief. And me, I just sat there, stunned, trying to process how a simple overnight stay had turned into this nightmare. In the days that followed, the full extent of the trafficking ring was uncovered. The motel was just one stop in a larger network. Sarah's sister was found and rescued. The traffickers were arrested. Justice, it seemed, would be served. But for me, the world had changed. I couldn't shake the memory of Sarah's terrified eyes, couldn't forget how close we had come to a very different ending. Every motel I pass now fills me with unease. Every stranger could be a threat or a victim in need of help. I've learned that evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes it's right there in plain sight, behind the desk of a rundown motel or in the cab of a friendly trucker. The world is not as safe as we'd like to believe, but there's also more courage and resilience in ordinary people than we realize. Sarah and I still keep in touch. She's in therapy now, working through her trauma. She tells me I saved her life that night, but the truth is, she saved mine too. She opened my eyes to a reality I had been blind to, and in doing so, she made me a better, more aware person. I don't know if I'll ever be able to take a casual road trip again without seeing threats in every shadow, but I do know this. If I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. Because sometimes the most important journeys are the ones we never planned to take. The first thing I noticed when I woke up was the silence. No birds chirping, no distant hum of traffic, just an eerie, oppressive quiet that seemed to press in on me from all sides. It was then that I realized I wasn't in my tent anymore. I had set out on this solo camping trip to clear my head, to escape the noise and chaos of my life in the city. The irony of my current situation wasn't lost on me. Be careful what you wish for, right? Let me back up a bit. My name's Alex, and up until yesterday, I was just another burnt-out office drone looking for a bit of adventure. I'd planned this trip for months, poring over maps, testing gear, and dreaming of the solitude I'd find in the wilderness. The first 2 days had been everything I'd hoped for. I'd hiked deep into the backcountry, far from the well-trodden paths and crowded campgrounds. The scenery was breathtaking, towering pines, crystal-clear streams, and views that seemed to stretch on forever. On the third day, I decided to explore a bit off the main trail. I'd heard rumors of a hidden waterfall, and the thought of discovering something few others had seen was too tempting to resist. In hindsight, maybe I should have stuck to the map. As I pushed through the dense underbrush, the forest around me began to change. The trees grew closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. The air became thick and heavy, filled with an earthy scent that was almost overwhelming. I should have turned back then, but curiosity drove me forward. That's when I saw it, a clearing up ahead, bathed in an odd greenish light. As I stepped into the open space, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. The world seemed to tilt and spin, and then, nothing. Which brings me back to where I woke up. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I realized I was in some sort of cave. The walls were smooth and slightly damp, with strange, glowing fungi providing a soft, otherworldly illumination. I sat up, wincing at the stiffness in my muscles. How long had I been out? Hours? Days? My backpack was gone, along with all my supplies. Panic began to set in as the reality of my situation sank in. That's when I heard it, a soft shuffling sound coming from deeper in the cave. I froze, hardly daring to breathe. Was it an animal? A person? Neither option seemed particularly comforting at that moment. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing off the cave walls. "Is anyone there?" The shuffling stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. Then, Slowly, deliberately, whatever it was began moving towards me. As it emerged from the shadows, I had to stifle a scream. It was humanoid in shape, but that's where any resemblance to a person ended. Its skin was pale and slightly translucent, with a network of veins visible just beneath the surface. Its eyes were large and completely black, reflecting the bioluminescent light of the cave like polished obsidian. I scrambled backward until my back hit the cave wall, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. The creature stopped a few feet away, tilting its head as it studied me with those unnerving eyes. Then, to my utter shock, it spoke. "You should not be here," it said, its voice a strange mix of clicks and whispers that somehow formed words I could understand. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My mind was reeling, unable to process what I was seeing and hearing. The creature took a step closer, and I pressed myself harder against the wall, wishing I could melt into the stone. "The boundary is weakening," it continued, seemingly unaware or uncaring of my terror. "Your kind must not cross over. It is not safe." I don't understand," I finally managed to stammer out. "What are you? Where am I?" The creature made a sound that might have been a sigh. "We are the guardians. This place, it is the in-between. Not your world, not ours. A buffer, a barrier." It gestured around the cave with a long, slender arm. "But the walls grow thin. Your people push too far, dig too deep, and now some slip through." My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Another world. Guardians. It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, not something I should be experiencing firsthand in what I thought was a simple hiking trip. How do I get back?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The creature's expression, if you could call it that, seemed to soften slightly. "It is not simple. The way back, it shifts, changes, but I will help you find it." Over the next few hours, or was it days, time seemed to move strangely here. The guardian led me through a maze of tunnels and caverns. We passed through chambers filled with crystals that sang with unearthly tones when touched, over underground rivers that flowed upwards, defying gravity, and through forests of stone trees with leaves of shimmering metal. All the while, the guardians spoke, telling me of their world and the delicate balance they maintained with ours. They were not gods, it explained, but rather custodians of the boundary between realities. For eons, they had worked to keep the two worlds separate, allowing only the barest trickle of energy to pass between them, the source of what humans called magic, or miracles, or unexplained phenomena. But in recent years, the boundary had begun to weaken. Climate change, deforestation, urban sprawl, all were having unforeseen consequences on the fabric of reality itself. More and more humans were stumbling into places they shouldn't be, and creatures from the other side were finding their way into our world. As we walked, I began to notice changes in my perception. Colors seemed more vivid, sounds more layered. I could feel the pulse of the earth beneath my feet, the whisper of energies flowing around us. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking, we reached a cavern unlike any we had passed through before. The walls seemed to shimmer and shift, like the surface of a soap bubble. In the center stood a ring of stones, each one carved with symbols I couldn't begin to comprehend. "This is the way back," the guardian said, its voice tinged with what I thought might be sadness. "Step into the circle, and you will return to your world." I moved toward the stones, then hesitated, turning back to the creature that had been my guide through this impossible journey. "What happens now?" I asked. "Will I remember any of this?" The guardian was silent for a long moment. "That is up to you," it finally said. "Some choose to forget, to write off their experiences as dreams or hallucinations. Others remember, but keep the knowledge to themselves, and a rare few, they become awakened. They see the connections, the hidden truths of the world. They work to protect the boundary in their own way. I nodded, understanding the weight of the choice before me. And if I choose to remember, to be awakened, then your life will never be the same, the guardian warned. You will see things others cannot, know things they do not. It can be a burden as much as a gift. I took a deep breath, considering my options. The thought of returning to my old life, of pretending none of this had happened, felt wrong somehow. I had been given a glimpse behind the curtain of reality, and I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I want to remember, I said firmly. I want to help. The guardian nodded, a gesture that seemed both approving and resigned. Then step into the circle, awakened one, and when you return, seek out others like yourself. You are not alone in your knowledge or your duty. With a final look at my otherworldly guide, I stepped into the ring of stones. The world around me began to blur and swirl, colors and shapes melting together in a dizzying kaleidoscope. I felt a sensation of falling, of being pulled in 1,000 directions at once. And then, suddenly, I was back. I found myself standing in the clearing where I had first experienced that strange dizziness, my backpack at my feet as if I had never left. But I knew the truth. The weight of my new knowledge, my new purpose, settled over me like a mantle. As I made my way back to the main trail, I noticed things I had missed before. A shimmer in the air near certain trees, the whisper of voices just beyond human hearing, the subtle patterns in nature that spoke of design rather than chance. I knew my life would never be the same. The world was bigger, stranger, and more wondrous than I had ever imagined. And now, I had a role to play in protecting it. As I emerged from the forest, I took one last look back. For a moment, I thought I saw a pale figure standing among the trees, its black eyes reflecting the sunlight. Then it was gone, melting back into the shadows of the in-between. I shouldered my pack and started the long walk back to civilization, my mind already racing with plans. There were others out there like me, the Guardian had said. I just had to find them, and together we would work to maintain the balance and to protect the boundary between worlds. My camping trip had turned into something I could never have imagined. But as I walked, I couldn't help but smile. After all, isn't adventure what I had been seeking all along? The crackle of the old radio was the only sound that broke the oppressive silence of the desert night. I should have known then that something was terribly wrong. But hindsight, as they say, is 20/20, and I was too focused on the promise of adventure to heed the warning signs. My name's Jack, and I'm what you might call a thrill seeker. Skydiving, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, you name it, I've probably done it. But lately, those mainstream adrenaline rushes weren't cutting it anymore. I needed something more, something truly unique. That's when I stumbled across an ad for the Ultimate Desert Challenge on an obscure forum. The premise was simple. Navigate through a section of the Mojave Desert using only basic supplies and your wits. No GPS, no phone, just you against the elements. It sounded perfect, challenging, potentially dangerous, and completely off the grid. I signed up without a second thought. The organizers were vague about the details, citing the need for secrecy to maintain the purity of the experience. All I knew was that I'd be dropped off at a remote location and given a general direction to head. The goal was to reach a specific point within 5 days. Simple enough, right? The day of the challenge arrived, and I found myself bumping along a dirt road in the back of an old pickup truck, dust billowing behind us as we drove deeper into the desert. The driver, a weathered old man who looked like he'd been carved from the very rocks around us, hadn't said a word since we left the last outpost of civilization hours ago. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the truck finally ground to a halt. The old man turned to me, his eyes hidden behind mirrored sunglasses. "This is where you get off," he growled, his voice rough as sandpaper. Head east. You'll know when you've reached the end." Before I could ask any questions, he'd handed me my pack and practically shoved me out of the truck. I watched, slightly dumbfounded, as he sped off, leaving me alone in the growing twilight. I took stock of my situation. My pack contained the basics: water, some dried food, a compass, and a small first aid kit. I also had an ancient-looking handheld radio, which the organizers said would allow them to track my progress and send help if absolutely necessary. As darkness fell, I set up a small camp and tried to get some rest. The desert night was surprisingly cold, and strange sounds echoed across the landscape. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of shifting sands and whispered voices. The next morning, I set out east as instructed. The terrain was challenging. Rocky outcroppings gave way to vast expanses of sand, with the occasional stubborn bit of vegetation clinging to life. The sun beat down mercilessly, and I found myself rationing my water more strictly than I'd planned. It was on the second day that I first noticed something odd. As I crested a small hill, I saw what looked like ruins in the distance, not the remains of some old western ghost town, but something much older. The structures seemed to shimmer in the heat haze, their architecture unlike anything I'd ever seen before. Intrigued, I made my way towards them, but no matter how long I walked, they never seemed to get any closer. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been a mirage, a trick of the light and my heat-addled brain. That night, as I huddled in my sleeping bag, I heard it. A low, pulsing hum that seemed to come from the very ground beneath me. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but as the hours wore on, it grew louder, more insistent. Sleep was impossible. By dawn, the sound had faded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The desert, which had seemed so empty before, now felt alive with hidden presences. I tried to radio for help, but all I got was static. The compass was acting strangely too, the needle spinning wildly before settling on a direction that I was pretty sure wasn't east. But I had no choice but to press on. The third day brought new horrors. The landscape began to shift in ways that defied explanation. Rock formations appeared and disappeared as I watched. At one point, I could have sworn I saw the sand flowing uphill, like a reverse waterfall. My water was running dangerously low, and the relentless sun had left me disoriented and nauseous. I began to hallucinate, seeing oases that vanished as I approached, hearing voices calling my name on the wind. It was in this state that I stumbled upon the cave. Half hidden behind a jutting rock formation, its entrance was dark and forbidding. Every instinct told me to stay away, but the promise of shade and possibly water was too tempting to resist. The temperature dropped noticeably as I entered the cave, bringing blessed relief from the scorching heat outside. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I gasped. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, depicting scenes that seemed to shift and change as I looked at them. Mesmerized, I moved deeper into the cave. The carvings became more elaborate, more alien. They showed impossible creatures and vast cities that couldn't possibly exist. And yet, there was something hauntingly familiar about them, as if I was seeing memories of a place I'd never been. That's when I heard the voices. Not the imagined calls of my heat-stricken mind, but real, tangible whispers echoing from deeper in the cave. They spoke in a language I didn't understand, and yet the meaning seemed to seep into my mind. They spoke of ancient things, of a world beyond the veil of reality. They spoke of guardians and gateways, of cosmic balances and impending doom. And they spoke of me. Terrified, I turned to flee, only to find my way blocked by shadowy figures. They were tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed in the darkness. One of them stepped forward, its movement fluid and unnatural. "Welcome, traveler," it said, its voice resonating in my head rather than my ears. "We have been waiting for you." I tried to speak, but no words came out. The being tilted its head, regarding me with what might have been curiosity. You do not understand yet. It continued. But you will. You have been chosen. Before I could react, the creature reached out and touched my forehead with a long, slender finger. Pain exploded behind my eyes, and the world went white. When I came to, I was lying on the desert sand, the unforgiving sun beating down on me. The cave was nowhere to be seen. Had it all been a hallucination? A dream? But as I sat up, I realized something was different. The desert had changed, or perhaps I had. I could see things now, patterns and energies that had been invisible before. The air shimmered with possibilities, and I could feel the pulse of something vast and incomprehensible just beyond the edge of perception. My radio crackled to life, making me jump. Through the static, I heard a voice. The old man who had dropped me off. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he said, his tone knowing, the truth behind the veil. What's happening to me? I managed to croak out, my throat dry and raspy. "You've been awakened, son," he replied. "The desert, it's more than just sand and rock. It's a gateway, a testing ground, and you've passed the test." He went on to explain that the challenge had been a ruse, a way to identify those with the potential to see beyond the ordinary world. I had been chosen to join a select group of individuals who safeguarded the boundaries between realities. As he spoke, memories of the cave came flooding back, not as a dream or hallucination, but as my first glimpse into a world I never knew existed. The beings I had encountered were real, as were the truths they had imparted. "What happens now?" I asked, my mind reeling from the implications. "Now?" the old man chuckled. "Now, your real journey begins." He gave me coordinates to a rendezvous point, where I would meet others like me and begin my training. As I set off, I realized that the desert around me was alive in ways I had never imagined. Every grain of sand, every withered plant, pulsed with hidden energies and untold secrets. My quest for the ultimate thrill had led me to something far beyond anything I could have imagined. The world was bigger, stranger, and more wondrous than I had ever dreamed, and I was now a part of it in ways I was only beginning to understand. As I walked towards my new destiny, I couldn't help but smile. After all, isn't this what every thrill-seeker truly wants? To push beyond the boundaries of the known, to experience something truly extraordinary. The desert stretched out before me, vast and mysterious. But now, instead of an obstacle to overcome, it was a gateway to infinite possibilities. My adventure, it seemed, was just beginning. The rhythmic thumping of my heart was the only sound I could hear over the roar of the boat's engine. Each passing second felt like an eternity as I scanned the horizon, praying for a glimpse of land, a passing ship, anything but the endless expanse of ocean that surrounded me. How did a simple day trip turn into this nightmare? I never should have trusted him. It all started on a sunny Tuesday morning in Miami. I'm Sarah, a 28-year-old freelance writer who had recently moved to the city for a change of pace. Always on the lookout for new experiences to fuel my writing, I jumped at the chance when my neighbor, Tom, invited me on a day trip to explore some nearby islands. Tom was charming, with sun-bleached hair and a perpetual tan that spoke of countless hours on the water. He'd lived in the building for years and was known for his love of the sea. When he mentioned he had a small boat and often took day trips to secluded spots, I was intrigued. "You'll love it," he assured me, his eyes twinkling. "There's this little cove I know. Perfect for snorkeling. Hardly anyone knows about it." I agreed without hesitation, excited at the prospect of discovering a hidden gem and maybe getting a good story out of it. The morning of our trip dawned bright and clear. I met Tom at the marina, a small bag packed with sunscreen, snacks, and my trusty notebook. His boat was smaller than I expected, but he assured me it was more than capable for our journey. As we set out, the Miami skyline receding behind us, I felt a sense of adventure bubbling up inside me. The sea breeze whipped through my hair, and the sun warmed my skin. Tom proved to be an engaging companion, regaling me with tales of his adventures on the water. Hours passed, and the coastline had long since disappeared from view. A nagging sense of unease began to creep in. "Shouldn't we be there by now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Tom glanced at me, a strange look flashing across his face before he smiled. "Just a bit further. Trust me, it'll be worth it." I nodded, pushing down my growing anxiety. But as another hour ticked by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "Tom," I said, my voice firmer now, "I think we should head back. This is too far for a day trip." He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had lost all its earlier warmth. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Sarah." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "You see," he said, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "I'm in a bit of trouble. Owe some people a lot of money. They were going to take my boat, my house, everything. But then I had an idea. What if I could offer them something more valuable?" Horror washed over me as the implications of his words sank in. "You can't be serious. This is kidnapping." Tom laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Kidnapping, human trafficking, call it what you want. The point is, you're my ticket out of debt." I lunged for my bag, desperate to reach my phone, but Tom was faster. He grabbed me, his grip painfully tight on my arm. "Don't do anything stupid," he growled. "We're miles from shore. You've got nowhere to go." For the next few hours, I sat in terrified silence as Tom steered us further out to sea. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out of this nightmare. I thought about overpowering him, but he was much stronger than me. Jumping overboard would be suicide, even if I could swim for help. There was nothing but open ocean as far as the eye could see. As the sun began to set, I saw another boat appear on the horizon. Tom's posture relaxed slightly. "Right on time," he muttered. The approaching vessel was larger than ours, a sleek yacht that spoke of serious money. As it drew closer, I could make out several figures on deck. This was it, I realized. Once I was on that boat, any chance of escape would be gone. Desperation gave me courage. As Tom was distracted, preparing to bring our boat alongside the yacht, I made my move. I grabbed the small fire extinguisher mounted nearby and swung it with all my might. The impact sent Tom sprawling. Without hesitating, I dashed to the controls. I had no idea how to operate a boat, but I had to try. I yanked at levers and pushed buttons frantically. The engine roared to life, and the boat lurched forward. Shouts erupted from the yacht as I sped away. I could hear Tom cursing behind me, struggling to his feet. I pushed the throttle as far as it would go, praying I could outrun them. What followed was the most terrifying boat chase imaginable. I zigzagged erratically, hoping to make myself a harder target. Shots rang out, bullets pinging off the metal of the boat. I ducked low, steering blindly, driven by pure adrenaline and the will to survive. I don't know how long the chase lasted. It felt like hours, but it could have been minutes. Eventually, the sounds of pursuit faded. When I finally dared to look back, the yacht was just a speck on the horizon. Relief flooded through me, only to be quickly replaced by a new fear. I was alone, in a boat I barely knew how to operate, with no idea where I was or which direction would lead me to safety. Night fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill. I huddled in the small cabin, shivering, trying to make sense of the boat's instruments. The fuel gauge was dropping steadily. I wouldn't be able to keep going for much longer. As dawn broke, I was running on fumes, both literally and figuratively. The boat's engine sputtered and died, leaving me adrift in the vast emptiness of the ocean. I had no food, little water, and no way to call for help. Days passed in a haze of fear and desperation. I rationed the little water I had, knowing it was the only thing keeping me alive. The sun beat down mercilessly during the day, while at night, The cold seeped into my bones. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my mind playing tricks on me. I saw ships on the horizon that disappeared when I blinked, heard voices calling my name only to realize it was the wind. On what I think was the 5th day, I saw it. At first, I thought it was another hallucination, a dark smudge on the horizon that slowly, impossibly, grew larger. A ship, a real ship. With the last of my strength, I waved my arms and shouted. My voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but I kept at it. As the ship drew closer, I saw a flurry of activity on deck. They had spotted me. The next few hours were a blur. I remember being lifted onto the deck, wrapped in blankets, voices asking me questions I couldn't quite comprehend. It wasn't until much later, as I lay in a hospital bed back in Miami, that the full weight of what had happened hit me. The police had a lot of questions. My story led them to uncover a human trafficking ring that had been operating out of Miami for years. Tom and his associates were arrested, facing a long list of charges. As for me, I'm still coming to terms with everything. The trauma of those days at sea has left its mark, both physically and mentally. I jump at loud noises, panic in enclosed spaces, and haven't been able to go near the ocean since my rescue. But I'm alive. Against all odds, I survived. And now, I have a story to tell, a warning to others about the dangers that can lurk behind a friendly face and the strength we can find within ourselves when pushed to the very edge of survival. Sometimes, in my dreams, I'm back on that boat, adrift in the endless blue. But when I wake, I remind myself that I'm safe, that I made it back. And each day, I get a little stronger, a little braver. Because now I know the truth. We are all far more resilient than we ever imagine, capable of overcoming even the most harrowing of circumstances. My simple day trip turned into a nightmare beyond imagination. But I survived. And in doing so, I discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. It's a strength I carry with me every day, a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope. You just have to hold on long enough to see the light. The first photograph I found was of a little girl with pigtails, smiling gap-toothed at the camera. It was the kind of innocent, joyful image you'd expect to see in any family album. But this wasn't a family album, and the dozens of other photos I discovered hidden behind the crumbling drywall were far from innocent. That's when I realized the Airbnb I'd rented for a quiet weekend getaway was anything but ordinary. I'm Emma, a 32-year-old graphic designer from Chicago. I'd been burning the candle at both ends for months, juggling multiple high-stress projects, and I was on the verge of a breakdown when my best friend suggested I take a weekend to myself, somewhere quiet and remote. I jumped at the idea. I found the listing on Airbnb, a charming old farmhouse about 2 hours outside the city. The photos showed cozy rooms with antique furniture, a wraparound porch perfect for morning coffee, and acres of rolling hills surrounding the property. It seemed ideal for a solo retreat. The owner, a woman named Margaret, was responsive and friendly in our messages. She told me the house had been in her family for generations, but that she now lived out of state and rented it out. She gave me the code for the lockbox and wished me a pleasant stay. When I arrived on Friday evening, the house was exactly as pictured. A bit creaky and showing its age, but charming in that rustic, time-worn way. I brought in my bags, made a cup of tea, and settled onto the porch to watch the sunset. For the first time in months, I felt the tension start to leave my body. That night, I slept better than I had in years, lulled by the complete silence of the countryside. I woke late the next morning, feeling refreshed and ready to enjoy my day of solitude. I spent the morning reading on the porch, then decided to explore the house a bit more. It was larger than I needed, with several bedrooms upstairs and a basement I hadn't checked out yet. As I wandered through the rooms, I noticed little oddities, A door that didn't quite fit its frame, a floorboard that creaked louder than the others, a window that was painted shut. In one of the spare bedrooms, I noticed a section of wallpaper that was peeling away from the wall. Curious, I gently pulled at it, and a large strip came away in my hand. That's when I saw it. A small door, about 2 feet square, hidden behind the wallpaper. My heart raced with excitement. A secret room. It was like something out of a mystery novel. I tugged at the small handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It took some effort, but I finally managed to pry it open. The space behind was dark and dusty. I used my phone's flashlight to peer inside and saw what looked like a stack of old papers or photographs. Reaching in, I pulled out a handful, and that's when I saw the first photo. The little girl with pigtails. At first, I thought I'd stumbled upon an old family album. But as I flipped through more photos, a chill ran down my spine. There were dozens of pictures, all of different children. Some were smiling, some looked confused or scared, and in many of them, I could see parts of this very house in the background. My hands shaking, I kept looking. Mixed in with the photos were documents, birth certificates, school records, even what looked like medical files, all for different children, spanning decades. The implications of what I was seeing began to sink in. This wasn't a family album. This was something much darker, much more sinister. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of it all. Had this house been used for some kind of child trafficking operation? Were these children victims of abuse? I felt sick to my stomach. I needed to call the police. But as I reached for my phone, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. The creak of the front door opening. Panic seized me. I shoved the photos and documents back into the hidden compartment and quickly tried to smooth the wallpaper back into place. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever was downstairs would hear it. "Hello?" a woman's voice called out. "Is anyone here?" I recognized the voice from the video tour on the Airbnb listing. It was Margaret, the owner. But what was she doing here? "Just a minute," I called back, trying to keep my voice steady. I took a deep breath, tried to compose myself, and headed downstairs. Margaret was standing in the living room, a friendly smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, hello, dear. I'm so sorry to disturb you. I was just in the area and thought I'd check in, make sure everything was okay." I forced a smile. "Everything's fine, thanks. The house is lovely." She nodded, her eyes scanning the room as if looking for something out of place. "Wonderful. Well, I won't keep you. Enjoy the rest of your stay." As she turned to leave, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. On her key ring was a small, old-fashioned key, exactly the right size for the hidden door upstairs. The moment she left, I ran to the window and watched her car disappear down the driveway. Then I raced back upstairs, my mind whirling. I needed to document what I'd found before I called the police. I reopened the hidden compartment and started taking photos of everything with my phone. As I did, I noticed something I'd missed before, a small notebook tucked in the back. I pulled it out and began to read. It was a diary, dating back to the 1970s. The entries were chilling, detailed accounts of children brought to the house, their training, and their eventual placement with wealthy families. It was all there in black and white, decades of child trafficking, hidden behind the facade of a charming country home. I was so engrossed in the diary that I almost missed the sound of a car coming up the driveway. Looking out the window, my heart sank. Margaret was back, and she wasn't alone. 2 large men were with her. There was no time to call the police. I quickly snapped photos of the last few pages of the diary, shoved everything back into the hidden compartment, and looked around frantically for a place to hide. The closet was too obvious. Under the bed? No, that's the first place they'd look. Then I remembered. The basement. I hadn't explored it yet, but it was my only option. I raced downstairs, hearing the front door open just as I reached the basement door. I slipped inside and quietly closed it behind me. descending the stairs into darkness. The basement was cluttered with old furniture and boxes. I found a spot behind a large armoire and wedged myself in, trying to control my breathing. Above me, I could hear footsteps and muffled voices. "Check every room," I heard Margaret say. She must have found something. The next hour was the longest of my life. I heard them searching the house, moving furniture, opening closets. Several times, footsteps approached the basement door, but to my immense relief, no one came down. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, I heard Margaret's frustrated voice. "She's not here. She must have left. Check the area. See if you can find her. I'll stay here in case she comes back." I waited until I heard the front door close and a car drive away before I dared to move. Quietly, I crept up the basement stairs and pressed my ear to the door. I could hear Margaret moving around in the living room. My mind raced. I needed to get out. But how? My car was parked right in front of the house. There was no way I could reach it without being seen. Then I remembered the back door in the kitchen. If I could just make it there. Taking a deep breath, I eased the basement door open. Margaret was in the living room, her back to me, talking on the phone. I crept along the hallway, my heart in my throat. Just a few more steps. I made it to the kitchen and slipped out the back door. Not daring to look back, I ran. I ran through the fields, my lungs burning, expecting at any moment to hear shouts behind me. But there was only the sound of my own ragged breathing and the thud of my feet on the ground. I didn't stop running until I reached a road. Flagging down a passing car, I managed to convince the startled driver to take me to the nearest police station. The officers were skeptical at first, but the photos on my phone were hard to dismiss. The investigation that followed uncovered a trafficking ring that had operated for over 50 years. Margaret and her associates were arrested. The children in the photos, at least those who could be identified, were tracked down. Some had been adopted by loving families and knew nothing of their origins. Others hadn't been so lucky. As for me, I gave countless statements to police and testified in court. The quiet weekend I had planned turned into months of legal proceedings and sleepless nights. But knowing that I had helped uncover such a long-standing evil, that because of what I found, no more children would suffer in that house, it made it all worth it. I still rent Airbnbs occasionally, but now I always check behind the wallpaper, just in case. The rain was coming down in sheets, transforming the lonely stretch of highway into a treacherous river of asphalt. I squinted through the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. That's when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched, his form barely visible through the torrent. I hesitated for a split second, every cautionary tale about picking up hitchhikers flashing through my mind. But something, call it compassion, curiosity, or just plain foolishness, made me slow down. I'm Alex, a 35-year-old software engineer from Seattle. I was on my way back from a conference in Portland, deciding to drive instead of fly to enjoy the scenic route along the coast. The weather forecast had promised clear skies, but Mother Nature had other plans. As I pulled over, the man rushed to the passenger side door, yanking it open and practically diving inside. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his lanky frame. "Thanks," he gasped, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "Thought I was going to drown out there." I nodded, still not entirely sure I'd made the right decision. "Where you headed?" "North," he said vaguely, his eyes darting around the car. "As far as you're willing to take me." Something about his demeanor set me on edge, but I chalked it up to the stress of being stranded in such awful weather. I pulled back onto the road, the tires struggling to find traction on the slick surface. "I'm Jake," I offered, trying to break the tension. He hesitated for a moment before responding. "Tom, nice to meet you, Jake." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof filling the void. I snuck glances at Tom when I could. He seemed jittery, constantly fidgeting and looking over his shoulder. "So," I ventured, "what brings you out here in this weather?" Tom's response was clipped. "Car broke down a few miles back. No cell service." I nodded, understanding the predicament. This stretch of highway was notorious for its dead zones. "Well, there's a town about 30 miles ahead. We can get you some help there." He grunted in acknowledgement, but said nothing more. The silence grew uncomfortable, and I found myself wishing I'd just kept driving. About 10 minutes later, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A car was approaching fast, much too fast for these conditions. As it got closer, I realized it was a police cruiser, lights flashing but siren off. Beside me, Tom went rigid. His hand moved to the door handle, gripping it tightly. "Looks like they're in a hurry," I commented, trying to keep my voice casual. "Must be an emergency." Tom didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the side mirror, watching the approaching cruiser with an intensity that made my skin crawl. The police car was right behind us now. I expected it to roar past, but instead, it matched our speed, staying right on our tail. "Maybe you should pull over," Tom said suddenly, his voice tight. "Let them pass." I was about to comply when the cruiser's siren suddenly blared to life, causing both of us to jump. The command came over a loudspeaker. "Pull over to the side of the road immediately." My heart began to race. Were they after Tom? Had I unwittingly aided a fugitive? Before I could react, Tom's hand shot out, grabbing the steering wheel. "Don't stop!" he yelled, trying to keep us on the road. We struggled for control of the car, swerving dangerously on the wet road. In the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Tom's face. His eyes were wild with fear and desperation. "Please," he begged. "You don't understand. They'll kill me." The sincerity in his voice made me hesitate. In that moment of indecision, Tom took advantage. He yanked the wheel hard, sending us careening off the road. Everything happened in slow motion. The car plunged down a steep embankment, rolling once, twice, before coming to rest against a tree. The airbags deployed, slamming into me with bone-jarring force. For a moment, all I could hear was the ringing in my ears and the hiss of rain on hot metal. As my senses slowly returned, I became aware of movement beside me. Tom was fumbling with his seatbelt, his movements frantic. "We have to go," he said, his voice sounding distant and muffled. "And they're coming." I tried to speak, to ask what the hell was going on, but only managed a groan. My head was pounding, and I tasted blood in my mouth. Tom finally freed himself and turned to me. For a moment, our eyes met. I saw fear there, yes, but also genuine remorse. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I never meant for this to happen." Then he was gone, disappearing into the rainy darkness beyond the shattered windshield. I don't know how long I sat there, dazed and confused. The sound of approaching sirens eventually cut through the fog in my mind. Flashlight beams danced through the trees, growing closer. "Over here," a voice called out. "I've found the vehicle." Hands reached in, gentle but insistent, checking me for injuries and carefully extricating me from the wreckage. As they laid me on a stretcher, I saw a group of officers fanning out into the woods, clearly searching for Tom. One of the paramedics leaned over me, her face etched with concern. "Sir, can you tell me your name? Do you know what happened?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain what had transpired when I didn't understand it myself? In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, the full story came to light. Tom, whose real name was Daniel Reeves, was indeed a fugitive, but not in the way I had assumed. He had been a key witness in a high-profile corruption case involving several police officers. The men chasing us that night weren't real cops, but corrupt officers trying to silence him before he could testify. The FBI had been monitoring the situation and arrived on the scene shortly after our crash. They managed to apprehend the fake officers, but Daniel had vanished without a trace. As I gave my statement, the FBI agents explained that Daniel had been in witness protection, but had fled when his safe house was compromised. His desperation that night hadn't been the actions of a guilty man, but of someone terrified for his life. Weeks passed, and I tried to put the incident behind me, but I couldn't shake the memory of Daniel's face in those final moments. The fear, the regret, the silent plea for understanding. Then, about a month after I'd returned home, a letter arrived. No return address, postmarked from a city I didn't recognize. Inside was a short note. "Jake, I'm sorry for what happened. You showed kindness to a stranger, and I repaid you with danger and deceit. I hope you can forgive me. Know that your actions that night, however unwitting, helped bring some very bad people to justice. Thank you, and be safe." I sat for a long time, staring at that letter, emotions warring within me. Anger at being put in danger, relief that it was over, and a strange sense of pride that I had, in some small way, helped do the right thing. The experience changed me. I became more cautious, yes, but also more aware of the complexities of human nature. We're all carrying burdens, fighting battles others can't see. Sometimes a simple act of kindness, like picking up a stranger in the rain, can have far-reaching consequences we never could have imagined. I still drive that coastal highway sometimes, and every time it rains I find myself scanning the roadside, half expecting to see a lone figure with his thumb out. I don't know if I'd stop again, knowing what I know now, but part of me hopes I would, because in a world where it's easier to look away, sometimes the riskiest choice is also the most human. Daniel vanished that night, as suddenly as he had appeared in my life. But the impact of our brief encounter lingers. It serves as a reminder that every person we meet, every decision we make, has the potential to alter the course of our lives in ways we can never predict. And sometimes, in the midst of chaos and danger, we find our own capacity for courage and compassion, even if it comes at a cost. The rain still falls on that lonely stretch of highway, and somewhere out there, I like to think, Daniel is safe, carrying with him the knowledge that even in his darkest hour, a stranger was willing to stop and offer help. In the end, perhaps that's all any of us can hope for, a moment of kindness in a storm. The first gunshot shattered the tranquil forest air like a thunderclap, sending birds scattering from the treetops in a panicked flurry. My best friend Mike and I froze mid-step, our light-hearted chatter dying instantly on our lips. We locked eyes, a single, terrifying thought passing between us. Those weren't hunters. Let me back up a bit. I'm Chris, a 29-year-old accountant from Boston. Mike and I had been planning this hiking trip for months, eager to escape the suffocating concrete jungle of the city and lose ourselves in the verdant embrace of the Appalachian wilderness. We'd chosen a lesser-known trail, one that promised solitude and unspoiled natural beauty. The morning had started perfectly. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the earthy scent of pine and wildflowers. We set off at dawn, our packs laden with supplies for our 2-day trek. As we hiked, we reminisced about our college days, laughed at inside jokes, and marveled at the breathtaking vistas that seemed to unfold around every bend in the trail. It wasn't until early afternoon that we encountered the first sign that something was amiss. The trail suddenly opened up into a small clearing, and there, incongruous among the natural beauty, stood 3 men. They were rough-looking characters, clad in ragged clothes that spoke of days spent in the wilderness. But it wasn't their appearance that set alarm bells ringing in my head. It was the way they looked at us, their eyes hard and calculating. "Well, well," the tallest one said, his mouth twisting into a sneer. "What do we have here?" Mike, always the diplomat, stepped forward with a friendly smile. "Hey there, we're just passing through. Beautiful day for a hike, isn't it?" The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The one who had spoken, clearly the leader, turned back to us with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "This here's private property," he said, his tone deceptively light. "You boys are trespassing." I frowned, confusion momentarily overriding my growing unease. "That can't be right. This trail's been here for years. It's public land." The moment the words left my mouth, I knew I'd made a mistake. The man's face darkened, his pretense of friendliness evaporating. "You calling me a liar, boy?" he growled, taking a step towards us. Mike quickly intervened. No, of course not. Look, this is clearly a misunderstanding. We'll just head back the way we came. No harm done." For a moment, I thought it might work. The men seemed to consider Mike's words, and I allowed myself to hope that we might walk away from this unscathed. But then the leader's eyes fell on our backpacks, and something in his gaze made my blood run cold. "I don't think so," he said slowly. "You've seen too much. Can't have you running back to town, telling tales." That's when I noticed the fourth man, emerging silently from the trees behind us, cutting off our escape route. We were surrounded. What happened next is a blur in my memory. I remember the panic rising in my throat as the men closed in. I remember Mike's startled cry as one of them grabbed his arm. And I remember the sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh as I tried to intervene and was struck with the butt of a rifle I hadn't even realized they were carrying. The gunshot that had frozen us in our tracks came moments later, fired into the air as a warning. "Move," the leader ordered, gesturing with his rifle towards a barely visible path leading deeper into the woods. With no other choice, we complied. Mike was limping slightly, favoring the arm they had grabbed. I could feel blood trickling down my face from where the rifle had struck me, but the fear pumping through my veins dulled the pain, replacing it with a hyper-awareness of our surroundings. They marched us for what felt like hours, deeper and deeper into the forest. The terrain became rougher, the trees pressing in closer. Eventually, we emerged into a small clearing. What I saw there made my heart sink. A ramshackle cabin stood in the center, surrounded by rusted vehicles and piles of debris. This wasn't just a chance encounter. These men lived here, hidden away from the world. Inside the cabin, they tied us to chairs, their movements practiced and efficient. The interior was a cluttered mess of mismatched furniture and mysterious equipment that I didn't want to examine too closely. "What do you want from us?" Mike asked, his voice surprisingly steady, despite the fear I could see in his eyes. The leader chuckled, the sound devoid of any real humor. "Want? We don't want anything from you, city boys. You're just in the wrong place at the wrong time." As the day wore on, the reality of our situation began to sink in. These men weren't just hermits or off-the-grid survivalists. The snippets of conversation we overheard, the suspicious equipment in the cabin, it all pointed to something far more sinister. We had stumbled into the heart of some kind of illegal operation, possibly drug manufacturing. Night fell, and with it came a bone-deep chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. The men had been drinking heavily, their voices growing louder and more belligerent. I caught Mike's eye across the room, seeing my own fear and desperation reflected there. That's when I noticed it, a small hunting knife, partially hidden under some papers on a nearby table. It must have been overlooked when they were securing us. If I could just reach it. I began to work at my bonds, ignoring the pain as the rough rope bit into my wrists. Hours passed, the men's drunken laughter providing cover for the small sounds of my struggle. Finally, I felt the ropes give way. Heart pounding, I waited for my moment. When the cabin had grown quiet, the men passed out from their drinking. I made my move. I grabbed the knife and quickly freed Mike. We crept out of the cabin, every creaking floorboard sounding like a gunshot in the quiet night. Once outside, we ran. We ran like we'd never run before, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. I have no idea how long we ran or in what direction. All I knew was that we had to put as much distance between us and that cabin as possible. The forest that had seemed so beautiful just a day ago now felt oppressive, full of hidden dangers. As dawn began to break, we finally allowed ourselves to stop, collapsing by a small stream. We were lost, exhausted and injured, but we were alive and free. It took us another full day of wandering before we finally found our way back to civilization. The local sheriff's office was skeptical of our story at first, but the evidence of our injuries and our obvious terror convinced them to investigate. The raid on the cabin uncovered a major drug manufacturing operation. All 4 men were arrested, and it turned out they were wanted in connection with several other crimes in the area. In the weeks that followed, as Mike and I gave statements and testified in court, I found myself grappling with the aftermath of our ordeal. The terror of those hours in the cabin haunted my dreams. Every unexpected noise made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. But there was something else too. Something I hadn't expected. A newfound appreciation for life, for freedom, for the simple pleasure of a safe night's sleep in my own bed. Mike and I, already close friends, now shared a bond that went beyond words. We had faced death together and come out the other side. I still go hiking sometimes, though never again on that particular trail. But now, every time I step into the woods, I carry with me the knowledge that danger can lurk in the most beautiful of places. And yet, I also carry the certainty that even in our darkest moments, hope and the will to survive can see us through. Our 2-day hiking trip had turned into a nightmare beyond anything we could have imagined. But we survived, and in doing so, we discovered a strength within ourselves that we never knew existed. It's a strength we carry with us every day, a reminder that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always hope. You just have to keep fighting, keep moving forward even when the path ahead seems impossible. The forest may have held terror for us on those fateful days, but it also taught us an invaluable lesson about resilience, friendship, and the indomitable nature of the human spirit. And that, perhaps, is the greatest trail we could have hoped to blaze. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull should have been soothing, but all I felt was a growing sense of dread. Something was very wrong. The boat that had been following us for the past hour was getting closer, and the look in Captain Mike's eyes told me this was no ordinary encounter at sea. I'm Sophia, a 28-year-old marine biologist from California. I'd been planning this research trip to study coral reefs in the Florida Keys for months. It was supposed to be a routine expedition, collect data, take samples, and enjoy the beauty of the ocean. I never imagined it would turn into a fight for survival. The day had started perfectly. The sun was shining, the water was calm, and our small research vessel, the Sea Whisper, cut through the waves with ease. Captain Mike, a grizzled old sailor with a perpetual tan and a wealth of maritime knowledge, guided us to our first research site. As I worked, carefully documenting the health of the coral and collecting water samples, I lost track of time. It wasn't until late afternoon that I noticed the change in atmosphere. Captain Mike was tense, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by a frown as he scanned the horizon. "What's wrong?" I asked, climbing back onto the main deck. He pointed to a speck in the distance. "That boat's been tailing us for a while now. Doesn't look like any research or fishing vessel I know." I squinted against the sun's glare. The boat was too far to make out details, but something about its presence sent a chill down my spine. "Maybe they're just headed in the same direction," I suggested, trying to sound more confident than I felt. Captain Mike shook his head. "They've matched every course change we've made. This ain't no coincidence." As if to confirm his suspicions, the boat suddenly picked up speed, closing the distance between us rapidly. "Get below deck," Captain Mike ordered, his voice taut with tension. "Lock the door and don't come out until I tell you it's safe." I wanted to protest, to insist on staying to help, but the gravity in his eyes stopped me. With a nod, I ducked into the small cabin, securing the door behind me. Through the porthole, I watched as the other boat drew alongside us, It was larger than the Sea Whisper, with dark-tinted windows that hid its occupants from view. I could hear muffled voices, Captain Mike's gruff tones mixed with unfamiliar, aggressive ones. Suddenly, there was a commotion above. The sound of multiple feet landing on our deck, followed by shouts and the unmistakable sound of a scuffle. My heart raced as I realized we were being boarded. I looked around frantically for a weapon, anything I could use to defend myself. My eyes fell on the satellite phone. With shaking hands, I dialed the emergency number Captain Mike had drilled into me at the start of our trip. "Coast Guard, what's your emergency?" a calm voice answered. In hushed tones, I explained our situation, giving our last known coordinates. The operator assured me help was on the way, but warned it would take time to reach us. Just as I ended the call, the cabin door burst open. 2 men entered, their faces hidden behind ski masks. One of them held Captain Mike at gunpoint, his other hand gripping the captain's arm tightly. Well, the gunman said, his eyes cold as they fell on me. "Looks like we've got ourselves a stowaway." "Leave her alone," Captain Mike growled. "She's just a scientist. She's got nothing to do with this." The other man laughed, a harsh sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Oh, I think she's got everything to do with this now. Can't have any witnesses, can we?" My mind raced, trying to understand what was happening. Witnesses to what? What had we stumbled into? They marched us back to the main deck, where I saw the true extent of our situation. The Sea Whisper was now tied to the larger boat, and several more masked men were transferring crates from their vessel to ours. "What's going on?" I demanded, finding my voice at last. "Who are you people?" The man who seemed to be in charge turned to me, his eyes glinting behind his mask. "Let's just say we're businessmen, sweetheart, and you and your captain here have wandered into some very profitable waters." It clicked then. Drug smugglers. We had inadvertently crossed paths with a trafficking operation. "Look," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We don't want any trouble. We're just here to study the reefs. Let us go, and we won't say a word about any of this." The leader chuckled, but there was no humor in it. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You see, we can't risk you changing your mind once you're back on dry land. No, I think you two will be coming with us for a little extended voyage." Fear clawed at my throat as the reality of our situation sank in. They were going to kidnap us, maybe even kill us once we were no longer useful. That's when I heard it. A distant thrum that was rapidly growing louder. Helicopter blades. The smugglers heard it too. Their heads snapped up, scanning the sky. "Coast Guard," one of them shouted, pointing to a spot on the horizon where a small dot was rapidly growing larger. Chaos erupted. The smugglers scrambled to untie their boat, shouting orders and curses. In the confusion, Captain Mike made his move. With a strength that belied his age, he shoved the man holding him, sending the guns skittering across the deck. "Run!" he yelled at me, already moving to untie the Sea Whisper from the smuggler's boat. I didn't need to be told twice. I dashed for the satellite phone, intent on updating the Coast Guard on our situation, but one of the smugglers saw me. He lunged, tackling me to the ground. We grappled on the deck, rolling dangerously close to the edge. With a surge of adrenaline-fueled strength, I managed to knee him in the stomach. He loosened his grip just enough for me to break free. I scrambled to my feet, but he grabbed my ankle, pulling me down again. That's when I heard the gunshot. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought Captain Mike had been hit, but it was one of the smugglers, firing warning shots at the approaching helicopter. The distraction was all I needed. I kicked free and ran to the wheelhouse and where Captain Mike was already starting the engine. The Sea Whisper roared to life, pulling away from the smuggler's boat, just as the Coast Guard helicopter arrived overhead. What followed was the most intense hour of my life. We sped away, the smugglers in hot pursuit. The Coast Guard helicopter hovered above, its loudspeaker ordering the other boat to stop. More shots were fired, pinging off the Sea Whisper's hull. But Captain Mike's experience and the arrival of Coast Guard vessels turned the tide in our favor. As we watched from the safety of a Coast Guard cutter, the smugglers were finally apprehended. In the days that followed, as we gave our statements and tried to process what had happened, I found myself grappling with a mix of emotions: terror at how close we had come to disaster, gratitude for Captain Mike's quick thinking and the Coast Guard's timely arrival, and a strange sense of exhilaration. I had faced true danger and survived. The incident made the local news, much to my discomfort. Suddenly, I was more than just a marine biologist. I was the scientist who helped bust a drug ring. It was surreal. As for my research, it took a back seat for a while. The Sea Whisper needed repairs, and honestly, I needed time to regain my sea legs, both literally and figuratively. But the ocean called to me, as it always had. A month after the incident, I found myself back on a boat, heading out to those same reefs. The experience changed me. There's no doubt about that. I'm more cautious now, more aware of my surroundings, but it also reinforced my passion for my work. The ocean, for all its dangers, is still a place of wonder and discovery. And now, every time I look out at those endless blue horizons, I carry with me not just the knowledge of its risks, but also the certainty of my own resilience. What started as a routine research trip turned into an adventure I never asked for. But it taught me valuable lessons about courage, quick thinking, and the unexpected ways our paths can cross with danger. Most importantly, it reminded me that in the vast, unpredictable ocean of life, sometimes the most important discovery is the strength we find within ourselves. The musty scent of age-old wood and secrets hit me the moment I stepped through the creaking front door. I had bought this house for a steal, eager to flip it and make a quick profit. But as my flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating layers of dust and forgotten memories, I realized I might have gotten more than I bargained for. Little did I know, the hidden door I was about to discover would lead me down a rabbit hole of mystery, danger, and a past better left buried. I'm Alex, a 34-year-old real estate investor with a knack for seeing potential in the most dilapidated of properties. This old Victorian on the outskirts of town had called to me from the moment I saw the listing. Sure, it needed work, a lot of work, but the bones were good, and the price was right. The first few days of inspecting and cleaning were uneventful. I cataloged necessary repairs, made plans for modernizing the kitchen and bathrooms, and dreamed of the profit I'd turn once the renovations were complete. It wasn't until I started tearing down the old wallpaper in the study that things took a turn for the bizarre. As I stripped away layers of faded floral patterns, my hand caught on something behind the paper. Curious, I peeled back a larger section, revealing a small, ornate doorknob set into the wall. My heart raced with excitement. A hidden door. This could add some serious charm and value to the property. With a bit of effort, I managed to pry the door open. The hinges groaned in protest, clearly unused for decades. As the door swung wide, my flashlight illuminated a small room beyond, and my excitement quickly turned to confusion, then unease. The hidden room was barely larger than a closet, its walls lined with shelves. But it wasn't the room itself that sent a chill down my spine. It was what filled those shelves. Dozens of old photographs, yellowed with age, stared back at me. Men, women, children, all captured in black and white, their eyes seeming to follow me as I stepped inside. At first, I thought I'd stumbled upon some sort of family archive, but as I examined the photos more closely, I realized these weren't all of the same family. The subjects were diverse, spanning different ages, races, and time periods. The only common thread seemed to be the haunted, almost fearful expressions on their faces. Amid the photos were stacks of documents, birth certificates, medical records, even what looked like police reports. My hands shook as I leafed through them, a sick feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. These weren't just random people. They were missing persons. I was so engrossed in my discovery that I almost missed the sound of a car pulling up outside. Panic seized me. I wasn't expecting any visitors, and something told me whoever was here wasn't just dropping by for a friendly chat. I quickly closed the hidden door, smoothing the wallpaper back into place as best I could. Just as I stepped out of the study, I heard the front door open. Footsteps echoed through the house, steady and purposeful. "Hello?" a man's voice called out. "Anyone home?" I considered making a run for it, but realized I'd have to pass the entrance to get to any of the exits. Taking a deep breath, I stepped into the hallway. 2 men stood there, dressed in suits that seemed out of place in the dusty old house. The older of the 2 flashed a badge. "Agent Carlson, FBI. This is my partner, Agent Reeves. We'd like to ask you a few questions about this property." My mind raced. The FBI. What did they know? I tried to keep my voice steady as I responded. "Of course, agents. What would you like to know?" They asked about when I'd bought the house, what I knew about its history, if I'd noticed anything unusual. I answered as honestly as I could without mentioning the hidden room. Something told me that revealing that particular discovery wouldn't end well for me. As they questioned me, I couldn't help but notice Agent Reeves's eyes darting around, almost as if he was searching for something. When his gaze lingered on the study door, my heart nearly stopped. "Mind if we take a look around?" Agent Carlson asked, though his tone made it clear it wasn't really a request. I nodded, trying to appear nonchalant. "Of course, though I should warn you, the place is a bit of a mess. I'm in the middle of renovations." They made their way through the house, inspecting each room with a thoroughness that set my nerves on edge. When they reached the study, I held my breath. Agent Reeves ran his hand along the wall where the hidden door was concealed, and for a moment, I was certain he'd find it, but his hand passed over it, and they moved on. As they prepared to leave, Agent Carlson handed me his card. "If you notice anything unusual, anything at all, give us a call." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Will do. Agents, thanks for stopping by." The moment they left, I collapsed against the wall, my heart pounding. What had I gotten myself into? Who were the people in those photographs? And why was the FBI interested in this house? Over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about the hidden room and its contents. I knew I should probably call the agents back, tell them what I'd found. But something held me back. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was fear of getting entangled in whatever this was. I began researching the house's history, digging into old newspapers and public records. The more I uncovered, the more disturbing the picture became. The house had changed hands numerous times over the years, each owner staying only a short while before selling or, in some cases, simply disappearing. One night, about a week after the FBI's visit, I was in the study, poring over the documents I'd found in the hidden room. A creak from downstairs made me freeze. I held my breath, listening. Another creak, then another. Someone was in the house. I quickly gathered the papers, shoving them back into the hidden room. As I closed the door, I heard footsteps on the stairs. My eyes darted around, looking for a weapon, an escape route, anything. The study door burst open. A man stood there, his face hidden in shadow, a gun pointed squarely at my chest. "Where are they?" he growled. "The files, where are they?" I raised my hands slowly, my mind racing. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied, praying he couldn't see the hidden door in the dim light. He stepped closer, his gun unwavering. "Don't play dumb. I know they're here. The evidence of everything they've done. Now tell me where they are, or I start shooting." In that moment, I realized I was in way over my head. This wasn't just about missing persons or some old family secrets. This was something bigger, something dangerous. Just as I opened my mouth to respond, a loud crash came from downstairs. The man whirled around, momentarily distracted. I seized the opportunity, lunging at him. We grappled, the gun going off with a deafening bang. Pain exploded in my shoulder, but adrenaline kept me going. I managed to knock the gun from his hand, sending it skittering across the floor. We traded blows, crashing into furniture and walls. Suddenly, the room was flooded with light. FBI, freeze. Agents Carlson and Reeves stood in the doorway, guns drawn. The intruder, seeing he was outnumbered, made a desperate dash for the window. Agent Reeves tackled him before he could reach it. As they cuffed the man, Agent Carlson turned to me. "You okay, son? Looks like that needs attention," he said, nodding at my bleeding shoulder. I nodded weakly, the adrenaline fading and the pain setting in. Who is he?" I managed to ask. Carlson's face was grim. Someone who thought he could bury the past, but some secrets refused to stay hidden. In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, the full story came to light. The house had been a waypoint in a decades-long human trafficking operation. The hidden room contained evidence that could bring down an entire network of criminals. The man who had attacked me was a cleaner, sent to destroy the evidence. The FBI had been watching the house, waiting for someone to make a move. I had inadvertently stumbled into the middle of their operation. As for me, once I was released from the hospital, I sold the house. The allure of flipping old properties had lost its shine. These days, I stick to new constructions, no hidden rooms, no dark secrets. But sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself thinking about that old Victorian, about the lives touched by its dark history, and how close I came to becoming another photograph in that hidden room. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers lurk behind the most ordinary facades, and that some renovations are better left undone. The first doll I found hanging from a tree branch sent a shiver down my spine. Its porcelain face, cracked and weathered, seemed to stare right through me with empty eyes. I told myself it was just some twisted form of forest art, a prank by local teens perhaps. But as I ventured deeper into the woods and encountered more of these eerie sentinels, I realized I had stumbled into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. My name is Liam, and I'm an avid hiker and nature photographer. I've always been drawn to the road less traveled, seeking out remote trails and hidden corners of wilderness that few others venture to explore. It was this passion that led me to the Blackwood Forest, a dense stretch of old-growth trees tucked away in a forgotten corner of the Pacific Northwest. I'd heard whispers about Blackwood from other hikers, tales of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and an oppressive atmosphere that seemed to seep from the very earth. Most wrote these stories off as campfire tales, designed to spook novice hikers. But for me, they were a siren call. I was determined to capture the essence of this mysterious forest through my lens. The morning I set out was crisp and clear, a perfect day for a hike. The trail started innocuously enough, winding through sun-dappled glades and babbling brooks. I spent the first few hours in a state of contented focus, snapping photos of gnarled tree roots and delicate wildflowers. It was around midday when the atmosphere began to shift. The forest grew denser, the canopy overhead blocking out more and more sunlight. The cheerful sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves gave way to an eerie silence, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the forest floor. That's when I saw it. The first doll. It hung from a low-hanging branch, its once white dress now gray with dirt and age, its head lolled at an unnatural angle, fixed eyes seeming to follow me as I approached. A chill ran down my spine, but my curiosity got the better of me. I raised my camera, the shutter click unnaturally loud in the stillness. As I continued down the trail, my unease grew. More dolls appeared, each in a state of eerie decay. Some hung from branches, others were propped against tree trunks or nestled in the crooks of roots. Their blank faces all seemed to watch me, silently judging my intrusion into their domain. I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe this was some kind of art installation, a memorial of sorts. But the further I went, the more my rational mind began to falter. There was something profoundly wrong about this place, a wrongness that seemed to seep into my very bones. The trail began to narrow, forcing me to push through undergrowth. Branches snagged at my clothes, almost as if the forest itself was trying to hold me back. I should have turned around then, should have heeded the warning signs. But some morbid fascination drove me forward. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, the dolls became more numerous, more grotesque. Some were missing limbs or eyes. Others were so decayed they were barely recognizable as dolls at all. And yet, they all seemed to be arranged with purpose, as if each placement had some dark significance. I lost track of time, lost in a haze of growing fear and morbid fascination. It wasn't until I checked my watch and realized night was falling that panic truly set in. I needed to get out of this forest, and fast. But as I turned to retrace my steps, I realized with growing horror that I couldn't recognize the path I'd taken. The trees all looked the same in the fading light, and the dolls seemed to have multiplied, surrounding me on all sides. I broke into a run, my heart pounding in my chest. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, the beam of my flashlight bouncing wildly. Every shadow seemed to hide a watching face, every rustle of leaves a reaching hand. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish chase. But suddenly, I burst into a clearing and skidded to a halt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, gnarled oak tree, and hanging from every branch, perched on every root, were dolls, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all facing inward. At the base of the tree was a crude altar of sorts, made of twisted branches and stone. As I stood there, frozen in horror, I became aware of a sound, a low, rhythmic chanting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The dolls began to sway gently, though there was no breeze. Panic overwhelmed me. I turned to flee, but found my path blocked. Figures emerged from the trees, cloaked and hooded, their faces hidden in shadow. They moved with an unnatural grace, advancing slowly but inexorably. I backed away, fumbling for my camera. If I was going to die here, I was determined to leave some evidence of what I'd found. As I raised the camera with shaking hands, the nearest figure reached up and lowered its hood. The face beneath was pallid and gaunt, with sunken eyes that glowed with an inner light. But what truly chilled me to my core was the realization that the face was familiar. It was the face of the first doll I'd encountered, now horribly, impossibly alive. The figure spoke, its voice a dry whisper that seemed to scratch at my very soul. "Welcome, photographer. We've been waiting for you." I wanted to run, to scream, to wake up from this nightmare, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away from those glowing eyes. "For too long, we have been forgotten," the figure continued. "Our stories lost to time, our suffering unacknowledged. But you will help us be remembered." The other figures began to close in, their hands reaching for me. I felt a tugging sensation, as if my very essence was being pulled from my body. The world began to fade around the edges, darkness creeping in. With the last of my strength, I raised my camera and pressed the shutter. The flash exploded in the darkness, momentarily blinding me, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later on the outskirts of Blackwood Forest, my clothes torn and dirty, my body covered in scratches and bruises. My camera was gone, as was any clear memory of what had happened after I entered that final clearing. The authorities searched the forest but found nothing. No dolls, no altar, no evidence of the horrors I'd witnessed. They put my experience down to hallucinations brought on by exhaustion and dehydration. But I know what I saw, what I felt, and sometimes, in my darkest dreams, I can still hear that dry, whispering voice. "Remember us. I don't hike anymore. I can't bear to enter any forest. for fear of what might be watching from between the trees. My photography now is confined to well-lit studios and bustling city streets. But no matter how bright the lights or how loud the urban noise, I can't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the depths of Blackwood Forest, those dolls are still waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon their realm and join their silent, eternal vigil. Every time I see a doll now, in a store window or a child's arms, I can't help but shudder, because I know the truth that lurks behind those painted smiles and glass eyes. I know the hunger that resides in the heart of the forest, always seeking, always waiting. And I know that one day they may come for me again, to finish what they started, to make me remember forever. The moment Tom vanished from my passenger seat, I knew I had stumbled into something far beyond my understanding. 1 second he was there, rain-soaked and grateful for the ride, and the next, gone. Just empty space where a person should be. But that was only the beginning of a night that would change my life forever and plunge me into a world I never knew existed. I'm Rachel, a 34-year-old software engineer. That night, I was driving home from a late meeting, the kind that leaves you drained and yearning for the comfort of your own bed. The rain was coming down in sheets, transforming the lonely stretch of highway into a treacherous river of asphalt. I was squinting through the windshield, the wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge, when I saw him, a lone figure on the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Every instinct told me to keep driving. Pick up a stranger in this weather, in the middle of nowhere. It was the beginning of every horror movie I'd ever seen. But something, call it compassion, curiosity, or just plain foolishness, made me slow down. As I pulled over, the man rushed to the passenger side door, yanking it open and practically diving inside. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes clinging to his lanky frame. "Thanks," he gasped, pushing wet hair out of his eyes. "Thought I was going to drown out there." I nodded, still not entirely sure I'd made the right decision. "Where are you headed?" "North," he said vaguely, his eyes darting around the car. "As far as you're willing to take me." Something about his demeanor set me on edge, but I chalked it up to the stress of being stranded in such awful weather. I pulled back onto the road, the tires struggling to find traction on the slick surface. "I'm Rachel," I offered, trying to break the tension. He hesitated for a moment before responding. "Tom, nice to meet you, Rachel." We drove in silence for a while, the rhythmic swish of the wipers and the drumming of rain on the roof filling the void. I snuck glances at Tom when I could. He seemed jittery, constantly fidgeting and looking over his shoulder. "So," I ventured, "what brings you out here in this weather?" Tom's response was clipped. "Car broke down a few miles back. No cell service." I nodded, understanding the predicament. This stretch of highway was notorious for its dead zones. "Well, there's a town about 30 miles ahead. We can get you some help there." He grunted in acknowledgement, but said nothing more. The silence grew uncomfortable, and I found myself wishing I'd just kept driving. That's when it happened. I glanced over at Tom to ask if he wanted me to turn up the heat, and in that split second, he vanished. Just gone. No flash of light, no puff of smoke. One moment he was there, and the next, an empty seat. I slammed on the brakes, the car hydroplaning for a heart-stopping moment before coming to a stop on the shoulder. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. People don't just disappear, it wasn't possible. I sat there for what felt like hours, rain pounding on the roof, my breath fogging up the windows. Was I going crazy? Had I imagined Tom entirely? Just as I was about to convince myself it had all been some sort of stress-induced hallucination, my phone rang. The screen showed an unknown number. With shaking hands, I answered. "Hello?" "Rachel." It was Tom's voice, but different somehow. Strained, urgent. "Listen carefully. You're in danger. They're coming for you." Tom? What's going on? Where are you? No time to explain. Drive. Now head for Miller's Crossing. Don't stop for anyone or anything. I'll find you there. The line went dead. My mind reeled. This couldn't be happening. But the fear in Tom's voice had been real, and some instinct deep inside me screamed that this was no joke. I threw the car into drive and peeled back onto the highway. As I accelerated, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. A car was approaching fast, much too fast for these conditions. My heart raced as the vehicle drew closer. It was a black SUV. Its windows tinted so dark they seemed to absorb the light around them. As it pulled up alongside me, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a man in a dark suit, his face expressionless as he stared straight ahead. The SUV suddenly swerved, trying to force me off the road. I wrenched the wheel, barely maintaining control as my tires hit the gravel shoulder. This was no accident. They were trying to run me off the road. Adrenaline surged through me as I floored the accelerator. My little sedan was no match for the SUV in terms of power, but I hoped its smaller size might give me an advantage on the rain-slicked roads. What followed was the most terrifying car chase of my life. The SUV pursued relentlessly, trying again and again to force me off the road. I took turns at breakneck speeds, praying my tires would hold. Every time I thought I'd lost them, they reappeared in my rearview mirror, closing in fast. As I approached Miller's Crossing, a small town I'd passed through countless times without a second thought, my fuel light blinked on. I was running on fumes, and my pursuers showed no signs of giving up. Just as I was about to lose hope, a figure appeared in the middle of the road. I recognized Tom instantly, though he looked different, more solid somehow, and his eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. He raised his hand, and suddenly, the world around me seemed to slow. The raindrops hung suspended in the air, and the roar of the SUV's engine faded to a distant hum. Tom opened my door and pulled me out of the car with inhuman strength. "Close your eyes, Gert," he commanded. I obeyed, and the world shifted. When I opened my eyes again, we were standing in a dimly lit room that looked like a cross between a library and a mad scientist's laboratory. Books and strange artifacts lined the walls, and in the center stood a group of people, all watching us intently. "Welcome, Rachel," an elderly woman said, stepping forward. "We've been expecting you." Over the next few hours, as I sat in stunned silence, they explained everything. Tom wasn't human. He was a guardian, a being tasked with protecting the boundaries between dimensions. The men in the SUV were hunters, rogue guardians who sought to break down these boundaries for their own gain. By picking up Tom that night, I had inadvertently become involved in a war that had been raging for millennia, hidden from human eyes. My act of kindness had marked me as a potential ally, someone with the rare ability to perceive and interact with beings from other dimensions. "You have a choice," Tom said, his eyes now their normal color, but filled with a wisdom that seemed ageless. "You can go back to your life, and we'll make sure you remember none of this. Or you can join us, help us protect the world from threats most people can't even imagine." I looked around the room, at the faces both human and not quite human, all watching me expectantly. I thought about my life, the monotonous job, the empty apartment, the feeling that there had to be something more. "When do we start?" I asked. The elderly woman smiled, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. "Right now." And so began my new life as a guardian in training. The world I thought I knew was just the surface, a thin veneer over a reality far more complex and dangerous than I could have ever imagined. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I find myself thinking back to that rainy evening on the highway. One simple decision, to stop and help a stranger, had altered the course of my entire existence. It's a reminder that kindness, even in the face of danger and the unknown, can lead to extraordinary things. As I write this, I'm preparing for my first solo mission. The rain is falling outside, much like it did that fateful night. But now, instead of fear, I feel a sense of purpose. Because I know that somewhere out there, someone else might be making the choice to help a stranger. And who knows, they might just save the world in the process.